Right, hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the fifth event of the series with the fearsomely evocative title, The Americans Are Coming. It's a one-week debate series pitting American evangelical speakers of Acts 17 ministries with experienced Muslim speakers living in the UK to share thoughts, ideas, and present the case for their respective viewpoints in the presence of open criticism. My name is Paul Williams. The series is hosted by the Muslim Debate Initiative, or MDI for short, an intellectual, political, theological initiative formed by experienced Muslim researchers, debaters, speakers, aimed at encouraging inter-community debate, discussion and dialogue. MDI believes that only through frank and open debate can deeper understanding be gained, relations between communities improved, and hopefully the breaking down of prejudice and false conceptions. It's with this in mind that we invited our honoured guests to come and present to you today's event, which is entitled, Has the Qur'an Been Perfectly Preserved? On my left, Dr. Nabeel Qureshi is a Christian apologist who converted from Qadianism in 2005. His conversion was a result of investigating the evidences for Qadianism, Christianity and Islam, as well as a spiritual journey involving dreams and visions. He has since attained his master's degree in Christian apologetics from Biola University in California and his medical doctorate from Eastern Virginia Medical School. He lives with his wife Michelle in Virginia. On my right, representing the Muslim perspective, is Bassam Zawadi. Brother Bassam has a bachelor's degree with a double major in management and marketing and a master's degree in strategic marketing. He runs a website, and I must get this correct, called call-to-monotheism.com, where you can read hundreds of articles on Islam and Christianity, all by him, and has participated in Muslim-Christian dialogues and debates around the world. He currently resides in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. Right, let's go to the format for this afternoon. There will be two opening statements. Bassam will go first, followed by Nabeel. Each opening statement will be 35 minutes long on the subject. Then there will be a 10-minute break. Then there will be 3 rebuttal periods. The first will last 15 minutes, the second will last 8 minutes, and the final one will last 8 minutes. Each speaker will have 8 minutes each to rebut the opponent. After that, I'm hoping there will be a question and answer period for 30 minutes. And concluding that, there will be a closing statement by each of the speakers in the order in which they began. Can I finally mention our grand finale, as we're calling it, this afternoon? In this venue at 5:15, the debate is called The Concept of God in Islam and Christianity, and that will be between Abdullah and David Wood. Right, I'd just like to explain a bit about the rules of the afternoon and the evening. No one shall shout, jeer or disrupt the speakers while they are speaking. Anyone who wishes to make comments should save them for later during the audience participation session, the Q&A session. Applause is allowed at the end of each speaker's discussion. Can I ask you to ensure your mobiles are switched off, or at least they're on silent mode, please? We would like to remind everyone that in accordance with the Islamic principles of Muslim Debate Initiative, that the commonly understood principles of etiquette discussion, that we should respect everyone's right to hold opinions and express them, even the most unpalatable ones, as long as they are expressed sincerely and for intellectually serious purposes, but not gratuitously and in a disrespectful fashion. We hope you enjoy this debate, 2 of them today, and gain a deeper insight into the Muslim-Christian dialogue and debate. And I'd like to ask Bassam to give us his opening statement for 35 minutes.
Assalamu alaikum, and thank you for coming. Today I'm here to defend the proposition that the Qur'an has been perfectly preserved. Now, what do I mean by that? What do I mean when I say that the Qur'an has been perfectly preserved? All I simply mean is this. If the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, were alive today and were to look at the Qur'an that we have, he would say that there's no chapter or verse falsely added to or missing from the Qur'an. The Qur'an was revealed to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, over a period of 23 years, in primarily two different locations, Mecca and Medina. Whenever an ayah being equivalent to verse, was revealed to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he would have one of his scribes, who are said to number in the dozens, to write it down. They would write it down on different kinds of materials, ranging from shoulder blades and ribs of animals, flat stones, palm leaves, pieces of leather, and wooden boards. However, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, during his lifetime, never ordered the Qur'an to be collected into one book. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, died, and his closest companion and father-in-law, Abu Bakr, became caliph. That is, he became the leader of the Muslims. During his caliphate, an incident occurred in which approximately 40 to 70 memorizers of the Qur'an were killed in battle. This worried some like Umar ibn Khattab, another very close companion to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who suggested to Abu Bakr that the Qur'an be compiled into one manuscript and kept in a safe place out of fear that possibly one day, a day might come where more memorizers of the Qur'an might be killed and passages might begin to get lost. So Abu Bakr, with some hesitation, agreed with Umar and summoned for Zayd ibn Thabit, who was not only one of the expert scribes of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, but also loved by the Prophet, peace be upon him, as if he were his own son. And he ordered Zayd to start collecting the Quran. Abu Bakr ordered Zayd to first obtain documented proof of the Quranic ayahs, and then demanded that two trustworthy witnesses testify that what was written in the document was accurate, and it was also written during the lifetime of the Prophet, peace be upon him. So here we see, it wasn't enough that Zayd just simply gets two witnesses for every ayah. Rather, he also needed documented evidence for the ayah, and that the document must have also been written during the Prophet's lifetime. Zayd kept on doing this until he finalized the collection of the Quran, which Abu Bakr kept in a safe place with him until he died. And then it was passed on to Umar ibn Khattab, the second caliph. And then when he died, he passed it on to his daughter Hafsa. So it was kept so that just in case any incident occurred in which all the memorizers of the Quran just suddenly passed away, the companions could always refer back to the manuscript which contained the Quran in its entirety. Now, Uthman, another very close companion to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who also had the honor of marrying both of the Prophet's daughters, has become the third caliph in the year 22 AH, approximately 12 years after the Prophet's death. But before I proceed to speak about what happened to the Quran under Uthman's reign, I need to provide you some background information. The Quran has a very unique aspect in regards to its mode of revelation vis-a-vis all other religious books. The Quran was revealed in 7 ahruf, or in 7 different modes. I'll be using the words ahruf and modes interchangeably in my opening statement. Now, what do I mean when I say that the Quran was revealed in 7 ahruf? I mean that the Quran was revealed in 7 various ways in which its ayahs could be recited. There are multiple independent and authentic reports that mention that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, taught this. We'll go to Sahih Bukhari, volume 6, book 61, hadith number 513. The Prophet of God is reported to have said, Gabriel recited the Quran to me in one way. Then I requested him to recite it in another way, and continued asking him to recite it in other ways, and he recited it in several ways till he ultimately recited it in 7 different ways. In the hadith number 514, right after it, it discusses an incident where Umar ibn Khattab once heard a companion reciting one of the surahs during prayer. Umar recognized what surah he was reciting, but he also recognized that the man was reciting the surah differently than him. So that concerned him. Why is he reciting the surah differently from me? So after the man finished the prayer, Umar grabbed him and took him to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. The Prophet, peace be upon him, told Umar, this Quran has been revealed to be recited in 7 different ways. So recite of it whichever way is easier for you. So what do we see so far? We see that 1, the Quran was revealed in 7 different modes. In other words, Islam teaches that there are divinely inspired textual variants. Second, The reason why the Qur'an was revealed in 7 different modes was because it made it easier for people from different tribes who spoke different dialects on, as they could choose from whichever mode they were more comfortable with. There's other wisdom behind the revelation of the Qur'an in different modes. However, since it's not directly related to the topic, I won't seek to expand more on that point. And 3, it is not compulsory. This is the crucial point that you'll have to remember in the debate. It is not compulsory for the Muslim to recite the Qur'an in all the different modes. Because the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, recite of it whichever is easier for you. Which means that it is enough for one to choose one of the 7 different modes as his reading. This indicates that each mode constitutes the complete Qur'an. Hence, not reciting the Qur'an in another mode does not imply that one is losing out in the Qur'an. Now you may ask yourself, how are the modes different from one another? What is the definition of ahruf? Well, at least 40 different opinions have been suggested in order to try and define what the nature of each mode was and how it was different from the other. However, Abu Ammar Yas al-Qadi, in his book, An Introduction to the Sciences of the Qur'an, explains that most of these opinions cannot be taken seriously, since they are too fanciful and don't measure up to the evidence. And he also says that there are explanations that are better attempts, but they're still weak. So he narrows it down to 3 explanations, and then eventually narrows it down to 2 explanations. One is that the 7 ahruf refer to the 7 dialects of the Arabs prevalent at the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, which means that the various ayahs would be pronounced according to the pronunciation of that particular tribe, and words from one dialect would be replaced by other words used by that particular tribe. Second is that the 7 ahruf denote 7 ways of recitation such that words are replaced by their synonyms. The 7 ahruf share no contradictory meaning, despite using different wordings sometimes in some ayahs. Some scholars also added that different ahruf use a combination of different words that carry different meanings, where all of the combinations are true and never contradictory to each other, and sometimes the words in the same ayah could be swapped around in order. For example, one mode of recitation says that the donkey of the man in Surah 2, ayah 259, which was dead, was made to rise. The Arabic word is nunshizuha. In another mode, it is said to be brought to life or resurrected, which is, the Arabic word uses nunshiruha. So here we see that both of these modes complement one another. And if you were to only have read one of the modes, you would still have understood the text as meaning the same thing, which is that the donkey was raised back to life. We talked about the 7 ahruf, but now there's something else known as qira'at. Qira'at in Quranic sciences refers to the various ways and manners of reciting the Qur'an that is with us today. We have to be careful not to confuse the ahruf with the qira'at. The 7 ahruf, the 7 modes, are the different ways, the 7 different ways in which the Qur'an has been revealed. The differences between these modes are not to do only with pronunciations of vowels or letters. Rather, as I said, they also have to do with the actual words used in the Qur'an itself, because synonyms could be used. However, this is not the case with all of the ayahs in the Qur'an, with only with some of them. But qira'at have to do with the combination of ahruf found in them. So the ahruf of the Qur'an is the actual content of the Qur'an itself, while the qira'at are ways of reciting them. So the ahruf exist in and are scattered throughout the qira'at, and since the ahruf vary from each other, it would also logically imply that the qira'at vary from one another as well. Today we have at least 10 established qira'at, and the condition for having accepted these 10 qira'at is that each one has multiple independent and authentic chains of transmission going back to the time of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Now I'm pretty sure, and I can see it in your faces, that if you have no background knowledge on this topic, you haven't fully grasped what I have just said. But understanding the meaning of these terms isn't really important for me to prove my case today. Regardless of what ahruf and qira'at mean, what is established and agreed upon by all Muslim scholars is that 7 ahruf are revelations from God, and the way we recite the Qur'an today is the way that the companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, recited it with his approval, which is all what matters to the Muslim at the end of the day. Now, going back to Uthman. So now what happened was that during Uthman's caliphate, some of the new converts to Islam, who formed part of the Muslim army and were lacking in knowledge of Quranic sciences and recitation, started arguing with each other. One of them was saying, my ahruf is better than my harf is better than your harf. My mode of recitation is better than yours. They were clearly speaking out of ignorance. For one cannot say that one mode is superior to the other when all 7 modes were revealed directly from Allah, and the Prophet, peace be upon him, said that we could recite from any one of them. So one of the companions by the name of Hudayfa approached Caliph Uthman and expressed to him his fear and concern of what was happening regarding the disputes. He urged that Uthman find a solution to the problem and save the Muslims from differing with one another excessively. So Uthman asked Hafsa for the manuscript collected during the time of Abu Bakr that was kept with her. And he formed a committee headed by Zayd bin Thabit, the same scribe that Abu Bakr chose, with a team of 11 other people, which included noted expert reciter Ubay bin Ka'b. Their job was to write out the entire Qur'an in perfect copies. They wrote out 5 to 8 different copies. They wrote each copy without any diacritical marks and wrote the words in a way that made it possible to maximize and allow as many different forms of recitation as possible, as long as they were valid readings, of course. If in certain cases the variant readings could not be contained in a single shape of a word, they would write the word in a different form in the other copy. So for example, in one copy they would write fatawakkal, in another copy they would write watawakkal, which is a difference of 1 letter. However, if there ever occurred an inability to write the text in a way so as to allow more than one different reading to be recited according to it, they would then write it in the Qureshi dialect, since the Qur'an was first revealed in this dialect, and it was the most respected dialect amongst the Arabs at that time, indicating that it would have gained more acceptance, more easily by other tribes. So the committee appointed by Uthman finished the copies, and they sent each one to a specific province. Uthman didn't only send the manuscripts to the respective regions, rather he also sent along with each manuscript a companion who was an expert in reciting the way of the recitation of the people he was sent to. Also, Uthman ordered that everyone submit his own personal copy of the Qur'an to the authorities so that they could have them burnt. This was to ensure that no copies conflicting with the new standardized texts would be used or spread. Now, burning, from many people, especially Westerners' perspective, has negative connotations. When you see someone burning something, you assume that he's trying to get rid of something evil. But in the Islamic perspective, it's completely different. In Islam, Muslims are forbidden to throw away paper that has any Quranic ayahs on it or that has the name of Allah on it. A Muslim might have a worn, torn Quran at home that he wants to get rid of, but he is not allowed to throw it in the garbage can. So Muslim scholars have stated that disposing of such material could be done through 3 methods. Either burn it, erase it, or bury it. So Uthman's burning these manuscripts don't really symbolize anything. It was only a means of disposing of these manuscripts. Now some of you might be asking yourselves, do Muslims today have the 7 modes? Do they have those 7 modes with them today that was revealed by God? That what we claim is revealed by God. Now there are 3 different opinions regarding this issue amongst our scholars. One opinion states that Uthman only preserved 1 out of the 7 different modes. The second opinion states that all of the 7 different modes were fully preserved throughout the entire 10 qira'at that we have today. The third opinion, which is the one that I favor, and is the majority opinion of the first 3 early generations of Muslims, is that the maximum amount of the 7 ahruf was preserved as long as it could be accommodated by the script of Uthman. Now let me be straightforward and tell you that it makes no difference whatsoever which opinion is true. None of these opinions could be theologically condemned on the Islamic basis. The Prophet, peace be upon him, said that it was enough that we know 1 of the 7 ahruf, because the entire Qur'an could be recited from each one of them. Today, as long as we know that each ayah that is in the Qur'an emanates from any of the 7 ahruf, then we could say that we have a divinely authoritative Qur'an fully preserved in our hands today, and all scholars today agree that each of the ayahs that we have today are revealed by Allah, which is what matters at the end of the day. Now the crucial question is this: did Uthman's manuscripts accurately preserve the Qur'an with 100% perfection, ensuring that no ayah that shouldn't be there was there, and that no ayah that should have been there wasn't there? Every single Muslim that we know about who lived during the time of Uthman agreed with the contents of Uthman's manuscripts. There was a unanimous consensus with no exceptions from every single Muslim living at Uthman's time that the contents of his texts were perfectly portraying the preserved Qur'an. Ali, the Prophet's paternal cousin, son-in-law, major companion, and fourth caliph, assures us that there was a consensus and agreement regarding Uthman's actions. He said, "By Allah, he referring to Uthman, he did not do what he did regarding the Qur'an except by agreement from us." Mus'ab ibn Sa'ad said, "I found overwhelming support for Uthman from the people. However, it surprised them, but none rebuked him for it." German Orientalist Theodor Nolden said, "When we consider all this, we must regard it as a strong testimony in favor of Uthman's Qur'an, that no party, that of Ali not excepted, repudiated the text formed by Zayd, who was one of the most devoted adherents of Uthman and his family." Uthman had several enemies during his time. Not a single one of his enemies accused him of tampering with the Quranic text. William Montgomery Watt and Richard Bell said, "If any great changes by way of addition, suppression, or alteration had been made, controversy would almost certainly have arisen, but of that there is little trace." Now I'm 99.99% sure that Nabeel is going to bring up Ibn Mas'ud and try to argue that Ibn Mas'ud disagreed with Uthman's manuscripts. If he does do that, I want you to pay very careful attention to the narrations that he brings up. You will see that not a single narration he brings shows that Ibn Mas'ud attacked the text of Uthman's manuscripts. He would show you narrations illustrating that Ibn Mas'ud did not agree with Uthman's standardizing the text of the Qur'an, because it didn't allow for the entire harf that Ibn Mas'ud recited to be incorporated, which is understandable, because his reading and manuscripts meant a lot to him, and we could understand and appreciate why emotions would run high. He would show you narrations where Ibn Mas'ud did not like how Zayd was selected for the committee while he was not. But I guarantee you, I promise you, that Nabeel will not show you a single narration where Ibn Mas'ud attacked the contents of Uthman's manuscripts. Now, I read Nabeel's posts on Quranic preservation in preparation for this debate, and he cites this one narration from which he alludes that Ibn Mas'ud attacked the Uthmanic Codex. He said, Ibn Mas'ud gave a sermon in Kufa and declared, "The people have been guilty of deceit in the reading of the Qur'an. I like it better to read according to the recitation of him," referring to the Prophet Muhammad, "whom I love more than that of Zayd bin Thabit." The reference that Nabeel gave was Ibn Sa'ad, Kitab al-Tabaqat al-Kabir, Volume 2, page 444. Now the phrase, "the people have been guilty of deceit in the reading of the Qur'an," appears to be a pretty clear accusation against the contents of the Uthmanic text. But what's the problem here? Is the problem that this phrase in the narration is from a weak source? No. Is the problem that this phrase is a mistranslation of the Arabic text? Again, no. So what's the problem? The problem is that this phrase does not exist in the original Arabic text. I went and I searched hard for this narration in Ibn Sa'd's book, Kitab al-Tabaqat. I found several narrations about Ibn Mas'ud talking about Zayd bin Thabit, which completely match this narration, except that this phrase, "the people have been guilty of deceit in the reading of the Quran," is not there. So I said to myself, perhaps the reference is wrong. So I went and searched in other collections like Al-Tabarani's Al-Mu'jam al-Kabir or Imam Ahmad's Musnad Ahmad. Just like the first source, they contain this exact narration without the first phrase, "the people have been guilty of deceit in the reading of the Quran." Then I consulted 3 experts that I know, and I had them search through the entire literature looking for this phrase, and they couldn't find it. So this phrase, as far as I'm concerned, does not exist. I don't know from which publication Nabeel got this, and I honestly do not care. All I'm going to say is this: if Nabeel is planning to present this narration as an argument, he better show me the original Arabic text. And if he doesn't, I'm just going to reply back and say this phrase does not exist, and would challenge him to show me the original Arabic source. And since I know Nabeel doesn't know Arabic, I'm going to recommend him to grab a pen and cross out that narration from his opening statement if you're actually planning on presenting it. Now, for the sake of argument alone, let us assume that Ibn Mas'ud at one point in time did accuse Uthman of tampering with the Qur'an. We know that he eventually revised his position and agreed with Uthman. How do we know this? One of the strongest proofs for Ibn Mas'ud later adhering to the Uthmanic manuscript, again, this is only if we're assuming that he disagreed with it in the first place, is the fact that his own reading agrees with it. Ibn Mas'ud's reading was transmitted to us through 3 different chains, and all of these readings agree with the Uthmanic manuscript. His reading was transmitted to us through Asim, Hamza, and Ali. 4th century Islamic jurist Imam al-Baqalani said, and if there were in the reading of Ibn Mas'ud anything that opposes the manuscript of Uthman, then surely this would have been revealed in the reading of Hamza especially. Now, if someone argues back and says that the reason why the Muslims agreed with the text was due to fear of Uthman punishing them, then this could be replied to as follows. First of all, the Muslims were only required to obey the ruler if he didn't order them to do something Islamically forbidden. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, there is no obedience to the creation if it constitutes disobedience to the Creator. If the Muslims even suspected that Uthman was telling them to do something wrong, they wouldn't have complied. Secondly, the Muslims would only have not complied. They would have argued back, and if need be and provoked, fought against Uthman if they believed that he tampered with the Qur'an. Since in Islam, Muslims believe that if the Muslim ruler were to commit clear apostasy such as this, under these specific conditions, then he must be overthrown. Thirdly, the very Muslims who were disputing with each other over the Quranic narrations and then eventually agreed with Uthman's decision were the very members of Uthman's army itself. It is Uthman's very army whom he was seeking to correct and needed their approval. Therefore, how could Uthman have used his army to force people to comply? In order to believe that the Uthmanic text was corrupt, we would be required to believe that either all of the Prophet's companions who lived with him and knew him and studied under him were all wrong about the Qur'an, that they deemed so precious and holy, or we would have to believe that all of the companions who sacrificed so much for Islam and practiced the faith as if it was their only purpose in life, spontaneously apostatized and tampered with the Qur'an, even though the tampering did not involve changing any theological beliefs or judicial rulings indicating that there was no motive. Internet Christian missionary John Gilchrist, whose works on Quranic preservation have been heavily utilized by those attacking the Qur'an, states, the very fact of such a wide distribution of the Qur'an texts, however, appears to negate the possibility that anyone could have added anything to the text after Muhammad's death. So here we see that even John Gilchrist admits that it was not possible for anything to be added to the Quranic text after Muhammad, peace be upon him, death. One cannot blame him for taking that position, especially since it's not only our strong oral tradition that has preserved the Quran, but our Quranic manuscript tradition reveals this as well. Michael Marks, Director of Research Center Corpus Coranicum, which is a project undertaken to study the textual origins of the Quran, had this to say in a recent article regarding the text to be found in the Old Hijazi script. He said, from the material that has been entered into a database to date, it would appear that any expectations that old Quranic manuscripts in the Old Hijazi script included in the photo archive would offer a different text of the Quran are unjustified. It is interesting to note that orthographic differences observed in manuscripts of the early 8th century are variations of spelling that a comparison of 20th century prints of the Quran from Pakistan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Morocco, and Nigeria show to be still alive. Muslim tradition does indeed refer to one text, yet still allows and transmits variant readings and writings within a certain range. Remember that I said that the 10 qira'at that we have today have differences within them, and that these are perfectly acceptable because they emanate from the different aqdaf and they go way back to the Prophet's time. Notice how Michael Marks is saying that the same exact ayahs are written in early 8th century texts, the same way we are reciting them today. So not only do we have a strong oral tradition for our recitations today, but manuscript tradition as well. Angelica Neuwirth, one of Germany's most renowned Quranic experts, writing in the Cambridge Companion of the Qur'an, comes to the following conclusion regarding the earliest Quranic manuscripts. As a whole, however, the theories of the so-called skeptic or revisionist scholars have by now been discarded. New findings of Quranic fragments, moreover, can be adduced to affirm, rather than call into question, the traditional picture on as an early fixed text composed of the surahs that we have. Adrian Brockett, in principal lecturer in the Faculty of Education and Theology at Port St. John University, said, "All this," referring to the manuscripts, "all this point to a remarkably unitary transmission in both its graphic form and oral form." And he goes on to say, "The limits of their variation clearly establish that they are a single text." The infamous Arthur Jeffrey states, "Practically all the early codices and fragments that have so far been carefully examined show the same type of text, such variants as occur being almost always explainable as scribal errors." Remember these statements that I just gave to you. Remember them. When Nabeel comes up and says, there are variants in this manuscript and variants in that manuscript, remember that these variants do not constitute a different Quranic text and actually affirm our qira'at today. Now what about the Sana'a manuscripts discovered in Yemen in the 70s, of which some of them are dated to the first Islamic century? What have non-Muslim scholars said about these extremely early Quranic manuscripts? Gregor Scholder, professor and chair of Islamic studies at the seminar at the University of Bassam, states, "We now have fragments of a Qur'an manuscript from Sana'a, Yemen, reliably dated by art historians to the second half of the first Islamic century, specifically between 710 and 715 AD. An analysis using carbon dating has even suggested an earlier date, between 657 and 690. These fragments show the Uthmanic text with orthographic variants, but no textual ones, and even include the first and last surahs absent from some non-Uthmanic codices." One of the folios from Sana'a is known as the Fog Palimpsest, and it's said to have been pre-Uthmanic or contemporary to Uthman. Islamic calligraphy specialist Marcus Fraser argues that this palimpsest is either contemporary to Uthman or pre-Uthmanic. So since it is pre-Uthmanic or contemporary to Uthman, we could have a pretty good idea of what kind of variants there were on the manuscripts that Uthman had ordered to be burnt. When you examine them, you would see that none of them actually show a different Quranic text and reveal variants that we already know about through narrations that you can either find in the Hadith literature or Quranic commentaries. And Nabeel Qureshi did a fascinating job showing the Surah 2, Ayah 222 variant from Fox Palimpsest on his website. And I looked at it, and that variant does not reveal a different Quranic text. So thanks, Nabeel. So here we see that the Qur'an is transmitted both orally and in writing. The two keep a check on each other, thus eliminating errors. The oral transmission keeps a check on the written transmission, and the written transmission keeps a check on the oral transmission. Variants are highly unlikely to be introduced orally, and even more highly unlikely to enter transmission, since one can refer to the parallel written transmission. Likewise, while unintentional scribal errors can be made, it is almost impossible for one to deliberately alter the text, and even more impossible for this to then become a part of the transmission of the text. That is because one could refer to the parallel oral transmission, which then eliminates textual scribal variants, which do not spread from manuscripts to manuscripts. Going back to John Gilchrist, I said that he believes that nothing was added to the text. But what he does believe is that there are passages missing from the Qur'an. He bases this argument on several narrations that state that there was once a so-and-so ayah that the companions used to recite. However, when you look at the Qur'an today, you don't have that ayah anymore. So how do we address such narrations? Well, in Islam, we believe in three different forms of abrogation. One, abrogation of the legal ruling of the text, but not its recitation. For example, Surah 8, Ayah 65 is abrogated by the ayah that follows it. Second example, abrogation of the recitation of the text, but not its legal ruling. For example, ayah stoning the adulterer. 3, abrogation of both the ruling and recitation of the text. For example, the verses on sucklings and whether they result in forbidding marriage between the one being suckled and one suckling. So here in this debate, we're dealing with type 2 and type 3, which involve abrogating the recitation of one of the ayahs of the Qur'an.
5 minutes left.
Here Allah has ordained and willed. Here Allah has ordained and willed, Here Allah has ordained and willed that these ayahs are to be recited temporarily, and with His great wisdom has decided from eternity past that it is only good for the early generation of Muslims to receive these Quranic commands. And it was not meant to be a permanent ruling for all Muslim generations to come. The Qur'an clearly teaches this. In Surah 2, Ayah 106, it says, "None of our revelations do we abrogate or cause to be forgotten, but we substitute something better or similar." Notice how the Quranic ayah is saying that Allah can ordain ayahs to be abrogated or forgotten. Allah will, if Allah wills, He could have, through divine intervention, made ayahs become forgotten, since they were not meant to stay around any longer than they already have. Now, whether one has theological objections to this belief or not is irrelevant to this debate. For the proposition that I'm seeking to defend here is that the Qur'an has been preserved the way Islam states it should. So these missing passages that John Gilchrist and others are referring to are actually not missing. Rather, the companions understood that they were abrogated and were not meant to be included in the Qur'an anymore because the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said so. And we have no record of any Muslim objecting to Uthman that there are passages missing from the official codex that he distributed. So in conclusion, the Qur'an has been transmitted down to us from the companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, who knew the Qur'an and understood its structure and contents better than any one of us today ever could. They reached a consensus on the matter that Uthman's codices were a perfect representation of the Qur'an, with nothing missing from or falsely added to it. This Qur'an has been passed down to us generation after generation through multiple independent and authentic chains of transmission, which we could compare along with our manuscript tradition. Today, we Muslims and even non-Muslims could and even should confidently state that we have in our hands today the same perfectly preserved Qur'an that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, approved of. Thank you.
Can I request, if you're sitting towards the back of the room, could you move forward so that you can clearly view the projector that's going to be used in this second presentation? So if you want to see and understand what's being said, you'll need to move forward towards the front of the room so you can view what's up here. Thank you.
Yes.
Yes.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Thank you for coming out to this debate. I find this debate to be extremely interesting, extremely important. I've never seen a debate done on this topic. I've looked for debates on the preservation of the Qur'an. It's such a common claim for Muslims. I myself believed it wholeheartedly while I was Muslim, and I hadn't actually seen any good discussion on this. I'd seen very one-sided polemics for it and one-sided polemics against it, but never really good discussion. So I thank Bassam for the opportunity to have this debate. I think you will see this debate is slightly different for that reason. We will have some back and forth during this because we'll cover things that each other probably don't know about. So I think that's great. This is going to be a different debate in that regard, and I'm looking forward to seeing how this ends up. Regarding perfect preservation of the Qur'an, I hear Muslims say all the time, the Qur'an has been perfectly preserved. Well, what does that mean? Bassam has made an excellent point. He says that there are variants. There are variants. So that right there contradicts the vast majority of what Muslims believe. There are no variants. Muslims will say every single word, no, Bassam, I agree with you. You don't have to take notes on this. Every single word that has come from Muhammad's mouth is exactly the same in every Quran, everywhere, no changes, never. This is what the vast majority of Muslims believe. Bassam rightly pointed out that this is not the case. Bassam rightly pointed out that this is not the case. There are variants. He says that, let me see if I can quote exactly what he says. He says, if Muhammad were alive, he would say no chapter or verse is falsely added to or missing from the Qur'an. That's how Bassam translates or defines perfect preservation. And I would say that's a much better concept of perfect preservation. It allows for words. It allows for words to be changed. It allows for words in various manuscripts to be different. His definition also allows for meanings to be distorted. In various verses, individual verses can have distorted meanings. According to his definition, that is allowed, and that is what we find. He says it allows and transmits variant readings within its range. Notice, he already admits that the definition of perfect preservation allows for the transmission of variants within its range, according to Bassam, and I'll agree with that. So Bassam has started this debate by agreeing with a lot of what I would say, that there are variants, that there are differences, and the vast majority of what Muslims believe is simply wrong. But what Bassam hasn't answered is what does constitute a variant? What constitutes a variant to the point where the Quran has not been perfectly preserved? He said, oh, a word change here or there can fall under ahruf, that's not a problem. Or little mistakes here or there, or a verse missing can fall under abrogation, that's not a problem. So what does constitute a variant? What has to happen to the Quran before it is not perfectly preserved? I ask you that question, Bassam. I think it's a fair one. I would like an answer. This is what Bassam said on his website. These variants are a part of our religion, confirmed by the Prophet, peace be upon him, and there is a great wisdom behind it. So Bassam's official published statement on this is, yes, variants are not only allowed, but they're good. And I think that's a great place to start. In discussing the question of perfect preservation of the Quran, we're going to look at a few different things. Bassam has already covered a lot of this, so he's freed up some of my time, which is great. He's discussed the history of the Quran. We're going to go back and talk about a little bit of that. We're going to look at some logical considerations regarding the abrogations, regarding the ahruf. We're going to talk about those logically speaking. Then we're going to take a look at the historical evidence. We'll see what history actually says about the Quran's preservation. We're going to talk about textual evidence. We're going to see what the texts that we have in our possession say about the perfect preservation of the Quran. And finally, we're going to review this in light of what he has said and what I have said in response. Notice, in order for there to be perfect preservation of the Quran, you can only go to two lines of evidence. Number one, you can say that the Quran is perfectly preserved and I have the original text to show that. And you can compare your current Quran to the original Quran and say, look, they're the same, therefore it's perfectly preserved. The other option is to say there are historical statements which say no verse has ever been removed or changed, whatever range of definition he wants to use. You need historical statements to say that, early historical statements. Those are the two ways you can show the Quran has been perfectly preserved. I contend that since Uthman has burnt all the manuscripts from the first generation of Muslims, there is no way to show textually that the Quran has been preserved, and therefore he has to go to quotations, historical quotations. He has to use a second line of reasoning. We'll look at that when we get there. So now let's look at the history of the Quran. We're going to discuss abrogation, ahruf. We're going to talk briefly about Abu Bakr, Uthman, the burning of manuscripts, and finally the different transmissions that we have today. Now, Bassam already mentioned this. There is what's called abrogation in the Quran. Verses that were revealed in the Quran can later be removed from the Quran. It says in chapter 2, verse 106, whatever communications we abrogate are caused to be forgotten, we bring one better than it or like it. Do you not know that Allah has power over all things? So this is a concept in the Quran, that we can abrogate verses that we have revealed. Then there's the ahruf from Sahih Bukhari, book 3, or volume 3, book 41, number 601. The Quran has been revealed in 7 ahrufs, or recited in the way that is easy for you. This is the exact same verse or hadith that Bassam has mentioned regarding Umar dragging someone by the neck because he said the reading of the Quran was different. After the Battle of Yamama, Abu Bakr did in fact say that he was worried there would be more casualties among the Qurra at other battlefields, whereby a large part of the Quran may be lost unless you collect it. So Abu Bakr is now worried after the Battle of Yamama that the Quran may be lost. This is why he starts collecting the Quran. That's Sahih Bukhari as well. According to Sahih Bukhari, Uthman ordered Zayd bin Thabit, Abdullah bin Az-Zubair et al. To rewrite the manuscripts in perfect copies. Now understand, Abu Bakr had already collected the Quran. He had used Zayd bin Thabit to go collect the Quran. That Quran ended up in Hafsa's possession, as Bassam stated. However, Uthman says, rewrite the manuscript in perfect copies. I wonder, why did Zayd then go forth and find verses that he had been missing, look through various evidences to see what the Qur'an actually was? If the first Qur'an that was collected under Abu Bakr was perfect, why did Uthman have to go back and redo it? Is it just the qira'at? Is it just the qira'at, or is it actually words that were different? We will see shortly that there were certain words and verses that Zayd missed, according to his own admission. Finally, we know that Uthman then burnt the text. According to Sahih Bukhari, he says Uthman sent to the Muslim prophets one copy of what they had copied, and ordered that all other Quranic materials, whether written in fragmentary manuscripts or whole copies, be burnt. So what Uthman unfortunately did at this point, you may say, of course you may say, that he made it so that there wouldn't be more confusion. For sure, that is true. What he also did is he effectively limited our ability to test textually whether the Quran was perfectly preserved or not. Now the best we can do is see whether the Quran is preserved according to that revised edition that Uthman put out. That's the best we can textually do, because everything else was burnt. Finally, we have what's called various transmissions of the Quran. Now, I'm not sure if you all are familiar with this, but the Quran that is generally used today is known as the Hafs transmission. It's a version of the Quran that is probably in your possession. 95% of Muslims use this, whereas 3% of Muslims, especially the ones in Northern Africa, don't use this Quran. They use the Warsh Quran. What are the differences between these? We'll examine that shortly. So now we've looked at the history of the Quran. Let's consider some logical considerations. First, abrogation, then ahruf, and finally the collection process itself. Bassam mentioned that there are three different types of abrogation. There's abrogation where the verse is left in the Quran and the law is taken out. In other words, you don't have to follow the ruling. There's abrogation where you follow the ruling, but the words have been taken out. And then there's abrogation where the ruling and the words have been taken out of the Quran. So he says there's three different types of abrogation. I ask, why these three different types of abrogation? Think about this. Whatever benefit you have for one type of abrogation is a disadvantage for the other type of abrogation. For example, Bassam says, when words are left in the Quran, this gives us the honor of being able to recite more words from Allah. Okay, so if you leave words in the Quran and take out the ruling, maybe you'll have more words to recite. But isn't that all of a sudden a disadvantage for the other type of abrogation, where if you take out the words and leave the ruling, you're not reaping those benefits. So whatever he says is a benefit for one type of abrogation automatically becomes a disadvantage for another type of abrogation. And besides, if anyone actually looks at this objectively, they'll say, how is this any different from just an escape clause for contradiction? In other words, in the Quran it is first said that Muslims cannot come to prayer drunk. This is one of the most common ones referred to for abrogation. Later, you're not allowed to drink alcohol whatsoever. So it is said that the second verse abrogates the first. To an objective bystander, that looks like a contradiction. And when someone says, oh, the second one abrogated the first one, how is that different from just explaining away a contradiction? Now, sure, that argument does not necessitate that there's a contradiction here. Maybe there was abrogation. But it does seem very suspicious that anytime there's a contradiction, someone can just say, oh, abrogated. It seems very suspicious indeed, and we'll see how that plays in the future. Finally, I want to bring this up. I'm going kind of out of order here. I have 2 points to bring up. Abrogation was allowed before it was stated in the Quran. Notice, in the Quran, chapter 16, verse 101, it is stated that people were questioning Muhammad as to why he can, at one moment, say there was a verse, and the next moment, say this verse is no longer the case. They say he's just coming up with verses, and then he's canceling them later. And 16:101 was revealed that Allah is allowed to abrogate things. Chapter 2, verse 101 had a similar background to it. People were complaining about the abrogations, and it was stated, does not Allah have the power to do these things? So abrogation was already happening before the verses in the Quran allowed for it. Otherwise, the people wouldn't have been able to complain about it. So that's one problem I have with abrogation. It wasn't something that Allah allowed and then it started happening. It happened before Allah explicitly allowed it. In addition, here is a big, big problem I have with abrogation. If the Quran is truly the divine word from God, as inscribed in a tablet in heaven, as it says in the Quran, then how is it that certain verses can all of a sudden be abrogated? Are they not in that tablet, or are they in the tablet? If they are in that tablet in the Quran, if they're permanently the Word of God, then how can they be abrogated and now not considered the Word of God? And if they were not a part of the tablet, then how is it that Muslims at one point said that they were? So it's like one moment you have something being the eternal Word of God, and the next moment you don't. This is extremely problematic. I would love to hear what Bassam has to say about that. I searched all through his website and couldn't find to that very basic consideration. The next point I want to talk about is the ahruf. What are the ahruf? Now, Bassam has rightly pointed out that according to Yasir Qadhi in this book he wrote, and I really do like this book, I think it's extremely scholarly. Yasir Qadhi has stated that there were over 40 opinions from great Muslim commentators regarding what the ahruf can possibly be. Do you remember what the ahruf are? Do you need a refresher? Muhammad said that the Quran can be revealed in has been revealed in 7 different modes. So repeat those modes according to what you desire. What are the ahruf? The fact of the matter is, Muhammad never told anyone what the ahruf was, nor did any of his direct companions know at all what the ahruf were, nor did any of the Salaf, the first 3 generations of Islam, know what the ahruf were. No one knew. It's like Muhammad said, oh, you read it one way, you read it another, that's okay. It's ahruf. No one knows exactly what the extent is, what the limit is, what the definition is. Now, Bassam provided 3 different opinions on what the ahruf are, and I have to say he was rather arbitrary in picking which one he'd like to go with, because even Yasir Qadhi says he doesn't know which one to go with. He'll have a general idea of which one's strong, but he doesn't know which one to go with. In fact, he said someone who spent decades of his life studying this one question, decades of his life, said, Allah knows best what the ahruf are. This is according to Yasir Qadhi. So here we have Muhammad saying, hey, variants, okay, it's allowed, up to 7 variants allowed. You know what this seems like to an objective observer? Since there are no limits to this seems like, hey, anytime you see a variant, just call it an ahruf. It's okay, just call it an ahruf. Whatever variant you find, just call it an ahruf. That's why I'm asking him, what's the limit to this? At what point do we say this is no longer a different ahruf, this is a textual problem? What is that limit? And I'm really interested in the response he has to give. So this does seem like an escape clause for variants in the Quran. Any variant you find, oh, it's just an ahruf. Any verse is missing, oh, it was just abrogation. There are escape clauses that come up here. Now, Bassam said it's very possible that there was a difference in dialect. It was simply a difference in dialect, although that's not the position he takes. He says the position Bassam takes on the ahruf is that these were synonymous. One ahruf has words that are synonymous with another ahruf. What we know is this just simply is not the case. According to Sahih Bukhari, according to Sunan Abu Dawud, Ubay ibn Ka'b says that Muhammad said, each mode is sufficiently health-giving, whether you utter all-hearing and all-knowing, or instead all-powerful and all-wise. So at the end of the verse, Allah is all-hearing and all-knowing. Oh, that's just as good as all-powerful and all-wise. Well, wait a minute. Is this just supposed to be a dialect? Or is this just supposed to be synonymous? Those words are not synonymous. They mean different things. All-powerful and all-wise are not the same thing as all-hearing and all-knowing. But according to various ahadith, we have these ahruf words. Oh, that's fine, and so is that. It seems to be just an escape clause to allow for variations. Finally, did Uthman irretrievably destroy the Word of God? Now, Bassam has said very nonchalantly that it doesn't matter what happened to all the ahruf. He gave various opinions, and he says it doesn't matter which one's the case. He says he believes that the max number of ahruf have been preserved in today's text. I'd ask him to share with us what his reasoning is for this. How does he know that the max number has been preserved? What kind of reason does he have to say that? If he has any reason, like he says, it's good to know, but it's ultimately irrelevant, because what does that really mean? It means that Uthman, when he collected the Quran in one codex, authoritatively mandated that various ahruf revealed by God be destroyed. He said, we would rather have one codex than all the ahruf which God himself revealed. What authority does Uthman have to say, destroy those ahruf, only keep these? It doesn't matter if it's the maximum number. What authority does he have to destroy any of them? Did God ever say he could do that? Did Muhammad ever say he could do that? Did Abu Bakr? That's my question to Bassam as well. Doesn't destroying the ahruf ultimately mean he's irretrievably destroying the Word of God? Finally, the collection process. I already mentioned how Hafsa's manuscript was already present. Abu Bakr got Zayd ibn Thabit to collect everything in a book. That was then given to Abu Bakr, which was then given to Umar, which was then given to Hafsa. Hafsa had a copy of a manuscript. Why is it that that was just not copied later? Why were other people consulted? Why did other things have to happen in order for the Quran to be sent out? Why wasn't Uthman just fine with saying, hey, we don't need another committee here, let's just get this and send it out? Fact of the matter is, the first book was also collected in the region which had Qureshi dialect. So to say that this was just to standardize everything under the Qureshi dialect is not a solid argument, simply because it was probably already under the Qureshi dialect. Also, Zayd ibn Thabit is recorded as having said, I was missing verses. I found this verse when I went and looked for it. So Zayd ibn Thabit himself admits that verses were missing. Finally, regarding the collection process, it has been stated that every single verse in the Quran is mutawatir. In other words, it has been confirmed by multiple people along multiple lines to the point which there's no reasonable way to say that this is not part of the Quran. That is not true. Abu Khuzaimah said, in Sahih Bukhari now, 62201, Abu Khuzaimah was the only person who knew, or in other words, he was the only one who had possession of 2 verses. He was the only one. Now Bassam has stated, oh, what this means is people were told to get documentary evidence. And he must have been, therefore, I'm extrapolating from what he said, and I'm going off of what he wrote on his website, that he must have, therefore, Abu Khuzaimah must have therefore been the only one to have it written down. And then other people were verbally expressing confirmation about this. This is not accurate. It is not stated anywhere that this is the case. I would challenge Bassam to show me one place in early Islamic times where it says that they needed documents and then verbal confirmation. I tell you, the first place this was stated was in the 15th century. If you show me something before the 15th century, I'll go with it. But this is not the case. People were looking for the Quran from the breasts of men and also from writing. Either one was fine and deserved, and as long as it was confirmation. Now, he may ask, well, what then happened here? We'll discuss that if need be. But the fact of the matter is, Sahih Bukhari says there were 2 verses in the Quran that only had one person who knew them, or who had them. So is this mutawatir? No. At best, it's ahad. So we've discussed some logical considerations. My time is running rather short, so I'm going to start speeding things up. Let's look at the historical evidence for the Quran. We're going to look at early statements, Muhammad's chosen teachers, Aisha, and other verses. According to Ibn Umar, now this is an early statement about the Quran found in Al-Itqan fi Ulum al-Quran by As-Suyuti. He says, let none of you say, by the way, this is the son of the second Khalifa, Umar. He says, let none of you say, I have got the whole of the Quran. How does he know what all of it is? Much of the Quran has gone. Let him say instead, I have what survives. I have what survived. Some people may say, oh, this is not from Sahih Sitta, this is not from Bukhari, you're saying Muslim, therefore we can't trust it. No, this is not a statement of Muhammad. The Sahih collection was mostly collected to show what Muhammad said, things that Muhammad did. When we're talking about the collection of the Quran, that's not the focus of the Sahih. This is a focus of other books, such as Kitab al-Masahif, Al-Itqan fi Ulum al-Quran. That is the focus of these books. So to say, oh, this is not Sahih, misses the point entirely. But the isnad here is actually really strong. We can follow the isnad right back to Ibn Umar from Abu Ubayd. So to say, oh, the isnad here is weak, is also a poor argument. Notice what he's saying. He's saying, how can you say that you have the whole Quran? Much of it has been gone. It's lost. I don't see why we're even having a discussion about whether all the Quran has been preserved. He's saying right here it's been lost. What about Kitab al-Masahif, a book by Ibn Abi Dawood? He says, we have heard that many Quran passages were revealed, but that those who had memorized them fell in Yamama fighting. Those passages had not been written down, and following the deaths of those who knew them were no longer known. Nor had Abu Bakr, nor Umar, nor Uthman as yet collected the texts of the Quran. Wow. So these books that are talking about the collection of the Quran are showing multiple people saying that large portions of the Quran have been forgotten or lost, and the isnad chains are strong. In this case, we have the son of the collector of Sunan Abu Dawud himself, his son, stating that, look, parts of the Quran have been inevitably lost, irretrievably lost. And not only does he say it once, he says it with threefold emphasis. Now, Bassam mentioned this on his website. I'll be interested to see if he comes with the same arguments. We'll discuss them later. Let's look at Muhammad's chosen. Muhammad himself, when he was alive, said, if you're going to learn the Qur'an from these four people. Abdullah bin Masud, Salim, Mu'ad bin Jabal, and Ubay ibn Ka'b. If you're going to learn the Qur'an, learn from these four people. Bassam is correct. I'm going to go to Ibn Masud. According to Ibn Sa'd, Kitab al-Tabaqat al-Kabir, it says the people have been guilty of deceit in reading the Qur'an. I like it better to be read according to the recitation of him whom I love more than Zayd ibn Thabit. Now Bassam has brought up a point. He says, I was not able to find this when I looked in the books in the Arabic. Okay, I will be honest and say I did not see this in the Arabic myself. I don't know how to read Arabic, so I'll make it a point when I leave here to find it. I don't think it's not there. I think it must be there somewhere. But I can't say that with veracity for sure, so I'll concede this point. According to Sahih Bukhari, however, now by the way, just because it's not explicitly said that Ibn Masud said this is a deceit, we still have plenty of reason to think that Ibn Masud did not agree with this Qur'an. So the rest of his assertion, I still disagree with. I can say that I didn't see this in the Arabic, but I do disagree with the rest of his assertion. Let me show you why. In Sahih Bukhari, number 55785, it says, isn't there amongst you Ibn Ab, the one who used to carry the shoes, the cushion, and the water for ablution? By the way, this is Abu Darda speaking. Abu Darda comes in contact with a man from Kufa. Now Kufa is where Ibn Masud lives. And Abu Darda he gets starstruck. He says, wait a minute. Doesn't Ibn Ab, that's another name for Ibn Masud, doesn't he live where you live? The one who used to carry the shoes of the Prophet, the cushion, and the water for ablution? Is there amongst you the one whom Allah gave refuge from Satan through the request of his Prophet? Is there amongst you the one who keeps the secrets of the Prophet, which nobody knows but him? Abu Darda, one of the closest companions of Muhammad, starstruck by Ibn Masud. Abu Darda then asked, how does Abdullah ibn Masud recite the surah starting with, by the night as it conceals the light? In other words, Surah 92 verse 1. So, Abu Darda, as soon as he hears a man knows Ibn Masud, he asks him immediately, tell me, what does he do with this? He has this pressing question. Notice, why does he have this pressing question? Is it just one random verse that he picks and asks about? No, there must have been some contradiction, some controversy in his region where he says, I need to go to someone who knows the Qur'an extremely well. He hears someone comes from Kufa and he says, that man knows Ibn Masud. I'm going to ask him immediately. And that's what happens. The response comes, by the night as it envelops, and by the day as it appears in brightness, and by the male and female. On this, Abu Darda said, by Allah, the Prophet made me recite the surah this way while I was listening to him. He's like, aha, I have been vindicated. The version I thought it was is the true version. Other people are wrong. So he's dealing with controversy by going to Ibn Masud. What does this show us? Number one, there is controversy about the Qur'an. Number two, Ibn Masud is the person people want to look to get the answers. And number three, Ibn Masud's version is different from what we have today. What else do we have? According to Kitab al-Masahif, Surah 2275 begins with the words, those who devour usury will not stand. Ibn Masud's text had the same introduction, but after the last word, there was added the expression, Yawm al-Qiyamati, on the day of resurrection. So here we have a clear indication of words that were added. Is this a synonym? No. Is this just another word of saying it? No. And here's the important point with this one. This is what I found very interesting with this specific one. Talha ibn Musarrif, who is a student of Ibn Masud in Kufa, included this in his Mus'haf. So what does that mean? It means the things that Ibn Masud included in his codex were not just his personal codex, no. They were being propagated to other Muslims. So other Muslims are learning from Ibn Masud. Of course they would. Because Muhammad said this is the greatest teacher. When he named 4 teachers, he named Abdullah ibn Masud first. So Ibn Masud goes to Kufa, he's teaching the Quran, people from all over are looking to him for knowledge, even people who are not in Kufa, and the people who are in Kufa then take what he teaches and propagate it, even though it's variant from what Uthman sends. Wow. I want to point something out. Ibn Masud did not include 114 chapters in his Quran. I hope you heard that. We, as Muslims, when I was a Muslim, and all of you who are Muslims generally believe that the Qur'an incontrovertibly always included 114 chapters. That is not correct. Muhammad's greatest and chosen teacher of the Qur'an, Ibn Masud, again, renowned for being the best teacher of the Qur'an, says there are only 111 chapters. He does not include Surah Al-Fatiha, Surah Al-Falaq, or Surah Al-Nas. He says these are prayers. They're prayers taught by Allah. They are Hadith Qudsi, but they are not part of the Qur'an. And he refused to contain it in his Qur'an. This is not just recorded by one person. It's recorded by Ibn Hajjaj, At-Tabari, and Al-Razi. According to Tirmidhi, listen to this. According to Tirmidhi, Ibn Masud said, "O you Muslim people, avoid copying the Musaf in recitation of Uthman." Whoa! Avoid copying the recitation of Musaf of Uthman? Keep the Masahif that are with you, i.e. the ones he taught them, and conceal them. For indeed Allah said, "Whoever conceals something, he shall come with what he concealed on the day of judgment." Wow! What is he saying? He says, do not take the Quran of Uthman. This man, he's talking about Uthman in context. He says, do not take the Quran of Uthman. Keep the ones I have taught you. You will be rewarded when you go to heaven. That's Tirmidhi, number 3104. Now let's move to Ubay ibn Ka'b. When Muhammad chose 4 teachers, those are the 4 teachers on the left, Ubay ibn Ka'b was one of them. Ubay ibn Ka'b is well renowned as being one of the best reciters. Ubay says of himself in Sahih Bukhari, Ibn Abbas says of Ubay, Umar said, Ubay was the best in the recitation. So he agrees. Ubay was the best reciter. He was also one of the 4 teachers Muhammad chose. But then he says, we leave out some of what Ubay recites. Ubay says, I have taken it from the mouth of Allah's apostle and will not leave it for anything whatever. So one of the best teachers of the Quran disagrees with other people on what should be part of the Quran and says, I will not leave this for anything whatever. Ubay. Now, Ubay, one of the best teachers of the Quran, of course, the best reciter, renowned for that, included 116 chapters. Not only did he include the chapters that Abdullah ibn Masud left out, he included 2 more. He included Al-Haq and Al-Khal. These are surahs recorded by Ibn Abbas and Abu Musa in their codices. So is Ubay the only one who includes these 2 surahs? No, other people from the same time frame include these surahs as well. And this is recording in Kitab al-Masahif, in Al-Atqan fi Ulum al-Quran by As-Suyuti, and more. I couldn't fit it in here, there's more. Now, Bassam has said, why is it that there was no uprising of people? Why were people not angry when all of a sudden Uthman's releasing this new Quran? Was it all of a sudden an Uthmanic conspiracy or a spontaneous apostasy, as he says, for all of a sudden people disbelieve and they want to conspire to change the Quran? That's not the case. I don't think anyone willfully tampered with the Quran. I would never say such a thing. I think that this happened just like it happens to every other book. Over time, things change. But why did people not stand up and yell something? Look, out of these 4 people, out of Salim, Mu'ad, Ubay, and Ibn Masud, 3 of them were dead by the time Uthman was collecting the Quran. The only one alive was Ibn Masud, and we know what his reaction was. His reaction was, keep the Quran. Don't let it be changed. I mean, on the day of resurrection, you will receive your reward. He says he doesn't like the recitation of Uthman. So we know that the people who are teaching the Quran, the 4 chosen teachers, the ones people should have gone to learn the Quran, 3 of them were dead. The one who's alive was vehemently against the Quran. Let's talk about Aisha now briefly. I gotta fly.
You've got 5 minutes.
Thank you. According to Aisha, there were missing sections of chapter 2, verse 238. It's called the section of the middle prayer. I could read all that, but basically she's saying that there are other words there that simply are not there anymore. And she says she heard this from the Messenger of Allah. Where do we find this? In some random collection? No, it's found in Muwatta Imam Malik, in Sahih al-Muslim, in Sahih Tirmidhi, and Jami' al-Tirmidhi, and Al-Itqan fi Ulum al-Quran. What about from chapter 33? Notice this. Aisha, Ubay, and Ibn Umar are recorded as saying Surah 33 was 200 verses long. 200 verses long. Now it only has 73 verses. Who are the people who confirmed this? All these books here. There's 5, 6, and those are just the ones that I counted from various sites. What about the verse of suckling and the verse of stoning? Aisha specifically mentions that the verse of stoning and suckling were revealed, and they were kept written on something. They kept that in a cart while Muhammad had died recently, so they were preparing for Muhammad's funeral. A goat came in and ate these verses. Now Aisha's saying a goat came in and ate these verses. That's why the verse of stoning and the verse of suckling have been abrogated. Now, I don't agree with that reasoning. I think if a goat ate something, it doesn't necessarily mean it's been abrogated. I think that we should consider that maybe this was a loss in part of the Quran. And who records this? Is it just one person? No, it's recorded in Ibn Majah. It's also recorded in 3 other sources. So we have plenty of historical evidence that there are verses missing, extra chapters included. We have sources that say that words within verses shouldn't be there. We also have more verses, by the way. To give you the whole context of the verse of stoning, Umar himself said that we do not find I'm afraid people will say we do not find the verse of Rajam in the Holy Book, and consequently they may go astray by leaving an obligation that Allah has revealed. Umar says many people have memorized this and practiced it. This is recorded in not just Sahih Bukhari, it's also recorded in Sahih Muslim, Al-Itqan fi Ulum al-Quran, Abu Dawood, Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah, Muwatta Imam Malik, all the best sources. And Suyuti clarifies, but for people who say that Umar adds to the Book of Allah, I would have written the verse on stoning. In other words, if you weren't accused of adding to the Quran, he would have written it back in himself. So was this abrogated? No, it couldn't have been. There's also a verse, the Valley of the Riches, by the way. Many sources include that there was a verse which said that if the Valley of Riches was given to the son of Adam, his belly would not be quenched, and we do not find this anymore. In my last 2 minutes, I'm going to have to talk about the textual evidence. So now we've looked at the historical evidence. Does it show the Quran has been perfectly preserved? No, the earliest statements say that it hasn't been perfectly preserved, that many parts of it have been irretrievably lost, and we have many accounts of people individually saying parts have been lost. What about the text? What do the texts themselves have to say? Well, we have Fogg's palimpsest, as he mentioned. I talked about that on my website. And in Fogg's palimpsest, this records a variant from Ibn Mas'ud. And the variant is found, I don't know if I can show you this. Oh well. It's in the bottom left corner there. It's from Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 222. And it shows a verse read according to Ibn Mas'ud. Now, what this proves is that Ibn Mas'ud had different words than today. Look at this. Some people will say, oh, the meaning wasn't tampered with. Well, according to Surah 3, verse 158 of the Paris manuscript, this is a manuscript found in the National Library of Paris. We have a variant in Surah 3, verse 158, where in the modern text it says, will surely, whereas in the variant text, the Paris manuscript, it says, will not. That changes the whole meaning of a verse. That changes the whole meaning of a verse, so it's not just meaningless stuff. In this book, published recently, we compare 2 of the earliest Qur'ans that we have in our possession, the Topkapi manuscript and the Tashkent manuscript. Both of those Qur'ans, considered possibly amongst Uthman's sent Qur'ans, we see all these variants recorded. And this is not something published here in the West, this was published in Turkey. Oh, and we have some more there. Finally, in the last few seconds, I have to explain the difference between the Hafs and Warsh transmissions. Like I said, 95% of the Muslim world follows the Hafs transmission, whereas 3% follows the Warsh transmission. There are different words here. These are what they are. I have to fly through these, but there are different words found there. So let's review. We have variant readings at all levels, in chapters, in verses, in individual words. Critical scholarship says things that you would never even want to hear about the Quran, but we didn't bring that up today. We brought in minor points. There are various modern myths about the Quran that I'll discuss in the next section, and I'll also discuss in the next section what makes the Quran different from any other book. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, ladies and gentlemen, we have a 10-minute break, after which we will hopefully all come back and have the rebuttal sessions. Thank you very much. The first rebuttal session will be 15 minutes each rebuttal. Bassam will go first, then Nabeel. Then Bassam will give a counter rebuttal, which will last 8 minutes. And then finally, another 8-minute counter rebuttal. Then after that, inshallah, we will have a question and answer session, which is quite important, so you can all comment or ask questions. After that will be a closing statement, 5 minutes each. Okay, let's begin. So I'll ask Bassam to give his 15-minute rebuttal, please.
Okay. All right. So according to my notes, Nabeel either takes a narration, makes a mountain out of a molehill with it. He mentioned one red herring. He appealed to one weak source. In 2 cases, he imposes personal beliefs and ignored Islamic teachings regarding the issue. He appealed to 2 narrations and gave misleading interpretations to them. He commits one double standard, appeals to 2 faulty translations, mishandled 2 narrations, and he appeals to 1 narration and lacks consideration of the historical context and commits 1 factual error. That's pretty impressive.
And a partridge in a pear tree.
All right, now let's start. Making a mountain out of a molehill. Let's start with a goat ate a verse. A goat ate a verse from the Qur'an right after the Prophet's death. After the goat eating it, how on earth does that prove anything? Did the goat also eat the memories of the companions of the prophets who memorized those verses? Was that the only hard copy that the several scribes of the Prophet had those verses written on? Plus, we already know what the verse of stoning is, despite its recital obligation and despite a goat eating up a paper that contains the verse. Also, notice the inconsistency. Nabeel Qureshi argues that Umar bin Khattab, way after the Prophet's death, tried to introduce the verse of stoning into the Qur'an. But I thought it was lost shortly after the Prophet's death, because the goat ate it. So his argument is very weak here. It's as silly as me saying, hey Nabeel, when I was in the 8th grade, my dog ate my biology homework. Doesn't that mean that it's impossible for you to have studied biology properly and become a proper doctor? So if you have a cough, don't go to Nabeel because my dog ate my biology homework in the 8th grade. All right, red herrings. He's saying, well, are these obligated texts part of the eternal Qur'an that Allah uttered? The reason why I say that this is a red herring is because he's giving a theological objection. This has nothing to do with the historical inquiry of the preservation of the Quranic text. Doesn't matter if you don't like the way Islam teaches the Quran has been preserved. That's not what we're debating about. We can make that in a different debate. You could title it, well, is the Islamic concept of preservation logically coherent? But it's irrelevant. So you won't say I'm escaping it. Let me address it anyways. I'll say yes, these abrogated texts are part of the uncreated Quran. Muslims believe that Allah's speech is His attribute and that His attributes are eternal since He's eternal. However, when we say that Allah's speech is eternal, we mean that it is eternal in existence, not in application. Even if the verse in the Quran that states that I have to fast in the month of Ramadan is uncreated, it doesn't follow that it is eternal in application. Since after the Day of Judgment, I won't have to fast anymore. Furthermore, it doesn't actually mean that they have to be eternal here on earth. How could that be even when the earth itself is not eternal? So even if Allah were to abrogate or cancel out some of this speech, it's not a cancellation of its existence, but a cancellation of its application here on planet Earth, which itself is not eternal. So certain verses of the Quran may be abrogated here on earth while they are still there in the preserved tablet. So it's a red herring. Don't respond to it. Let's not get philosophical. Let's stick to the historical issue. Appealing to weak sources. He appealed to a narration in Ibn Abi Dawood that said that during the Battle of Yamama, some people died and the verses were lost with them. Now, he said that he really respects Abu Ammar Yasir Qadi and he likes that book. In that book, Abu Ammar Yasir Qadi is saying, from Kitab al-Masahif, the source that he appealed to, you have to examine whether the isnad is authentic or not. And in this narration, it's not. First, it's a mursal hadith, which means that there's a gap in the chain of transmission, and we don't know if it's a reliable narrator that fills that gap or not. Secondly, it contains Yunus bin Yazid, who has been criticized for making mistakes. Third, it contradicts a more authentic narration from the Sahih Bukhari, where we see that Umar bin Khattab said that he was worried about the Quran becoming lost with the deaths that occurred in Yamama. So the narrator Yazid, by mistake, probably said that those who uniquely memorized some of the Quran died in Yamama, while he should have said that there was a fear of this happening. Fourth, we already know that people like Zayd bin Thabit memorized the entire Quran, yet did not die in the Battle of Yamama. So he could have easily recovered what was lost. Imposing personal beliefs and ignoring Islamic teachings. He said, well, he misrepresented me, but he's saying, I said it's okay that synonyms could come and distort the issue, and I said no such thing. The narration said, each mode is sufficiently health-giving, whether you utter all hearing, all knowing, or it said all powerful, all wise. He said, well, these are not synonyms. Okay, I'm not going to blame you because I probably said my opening statement a bit too quick, but I said that there's also an opinion where different combinations of words could be used in order to imply a similar meaning. So I said that. And what is the most important thing here if you are a Muslim? The Prophet said each mode is sufficiently health-giving. The Prophet ﷺ is saying that it's okay. What more do you want as a Muslim? Secondly, the Qur'an states back when the Prophet was in Mecca, a verse came down, Surah 10, verses 15 to 16. It's saying, say, O Muhammad, it is not for me to change it of my accord. I only follow that which is inspired of me. Because the Quraysh in Mecca used to tell the Prophet Muhammad, change the Qur'an, we don't like what it says. And the verse came down saying, no, I can't change it. So if the Prophet was willing to tamper with the Quranic revelation, why didn't he do it for his enemies and avoid persecution? Which would have made more sense than doing it for his companions who were already loyal to him. It doesn't make sense. Thirdly, if the companions understood that it was up to them to choose their own words and synonyms, then we would have found dozens of variants on the same verse and would have seen them putting it into practice. Fourthly, as Mustafa al-Azami states on page 162 of his book, The History of the Quranic Text from Revelation to Compilation, this was mainly intended as a relief for the companions for ease of memorization so that they won't get discouraged from reciting from memory. The Surah 92 variant, the one with Abu Darda. As Ibn Hajar explains, this recitation was not transmitted except through those mentioned here, and everybody else recited by the creation of male and female. And this is the established recitation, despite the authentic chain of transmitters of the other recitation of Abu Darda and those mentioned with him. He goes on to say, that later on Abu Darda transmitted his reading, and as I said in my opening statement, we have Ibn Mas'ud's reading through 3 different chains, which show them reciting Surah 92 exactly how we are today. So how do we explain that one? I would say that it's probably due to his previous reading according to the Hadith of Hudayl. And then later on, Ibn Mas'ud agreed with the Uthmanic text and started reciting it accordingly. He was trying to shock everyone here, saying Ibn Mas'ud only believed, he didn't believe that Surah Al-Fatiha was from the Qur'an. He didn't believe that Surah Al-Falaq and Surah Al-Nas were from the Qur'an. I have to divide my responses into 2 here. First issue is about Surah 1, then I'm going to talk about Surahs 113 and 114. About Surah 1, first of all, none of the narrations that I looked at state that Ibn Mas'ud did not consider Surah 1 to be part of the Qur'an. The narrations only state that he did not have them written down in his codex. Secondly, it is impossible to believe that Ibn Mas'ud did not believe that Surah 1 was part of the Qur'an when it is compulsory for every Muslim to recite it as a first surah in his prayer. Thirdly, there are possible explanations for why Ibn Mas'ud did not include Surah 1 in his codex. 3rd century Islamic scholar Ibn Qutayba in his book Ta'wil Mashkal al-Qur'an hypothesized that Ibn Mas'ud didn't write down Surah 1 in order to make clear that there is no doubt that this surah would ever be lost, because it's recited in every prayer. And therefore Ibn Mas'ud was stressing on this point by not even bothering to include it in his manuscript. Furthermore, there's a narration where someone asked Ibn Mas'ud why he didn't include Surah 1 in his manuscript. He replied back and said if he were to do so, then he would have to write it in front of every surah. So here it seems that Ibn Mas'ud didn't write it out of convenience in order to avoid writing it over 100 times. He probably felt that he needed to write it before every surah, since it is recited before a surah in prayer. This is how Al-Qurtubi in his commentary also explained the issue. Fourthly, even if, let's assume for the sake of argument, even if Ibn Mas'ud denied Surah 1, his opinions to be rejected, since Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, "La salata illa bi qira'ati al-Fatiha al-Kitab," which means there is no prayer except with the recitation of the opening chapter of the book, which is Surah 1. And he is obviously a much higher authority than Ibn Mas'ud. Now, let's talk about Surahs 113 and 114. Okay, I'm going to admit, the narrations that talk about Ibn Mas'ud not believing in Surahs 113 and 114 being part of the Qur'an, I'm going to admit that they are authentic. Some of the scholars try to declare them as a fabrication, but many of the other scholars said that is not academic honesty. So I'm going to grant it, he did hold this position. But the question is, did he die insisting upon this position? It appears that Ibn Mas'ud did not die upon this position. We don't know when Ibn Mas'ud held the position that surahs 113 and 114 were not part of the Quran. However, we do know what his final recitation was. As I said, his reading was transmitted through 3 different chains, and they include surah 113 and 114. Thirdly, there are possible explanations for why Ibn Mas'ud did not include surahs 113 and 114 in his codex, and that's because he saw the Prophet, peace be upon him, reciting them as incantations for his grandchildren, and he never heard the Prophet reciting them in his prayer. So he thought that they were part of the Quran. Fourthly, again, to make Nabeel happy, let's assume Ibn Mas'ud died believing Surah 113 and 114 were not part of the Quran. We already have direct proof from Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him himself, that these 2 surahs are surahs from the Quran. Refer to Sunan Abu Dawud, Book 8, Hadith numbers 1419 and 1457. So again, why would I take Ibn Mas'ud over Prophet Muhammad? And this is all for the sake of argument, we're assuming that Ibn Mas'ud did deny it. Nabeel said the Quran has an escape clause for any of his mistakes or variants. He's saying, so if the Muslims see any variance, they could conveniently brush it aside and say, it's due to the 7 ahruf. First of all, if the existence of the ahruf is proven and its meaning is understood from the strongest opinion, then whether one calls this explanation an escape clause or plausible, the fact that this explanation is valid and proven to be so. Secondly, Muslim scholars don't simply attribute any variance to the 7 ahruf whenever they feel like it. The variance may be due to scribal errors or marginal notes added to the codex. An expert in the field of Quranic sciences and recitation is qualified to distinguish between these kinds of variants. One has to know Arabic very well, the dialects of the Arabs, Quranic commentary, science of hadith, and science of Quran in order to know how to distinguish between variants and whether they are due to ahruf, marginal notes, scribal errors, abrogated verses, etc. For example, Abdul Aziz Rabah, in his book, Al-Hujjah al-Qurra al-Sab'a, the evidence for the 7 readings, discusses in extreme detail every single verse that has variants and illustrates where these variants came from and due to what reason. So no, it's not just a convenient escape clause. There has to be evidence put forth for any claim. Double standards. Nabeel said you cannot prove preservation because the manuscripts were destroyed before Uthman's time. Let me give 5 points. On my 5th point, I'll say why this is doing a double standard. First, the statement overlooks the fact that these destroyed manuscripts were the basis for the Uthmanic copies. Why do we need to compare our copies today with the pre-Uthmanic ones when the pre-Uthmanic ones themselves were the basis for what we have today? Secondly, the ones who burned these pre-Uthmanic manuscripts were none other than the companions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him himself, who were experts in Quranic memorization, recitation, and dictation, and their work was accepted by all Muslims. Furthermore, they were pious Muslims, so it's not like they were burned by people seeking to destroy the Quranic text and had bad motives. Thirdly, we have a very good idea of what kind of variants there were that existed before Uthman's revision through commentaries and narrations and Fogg's palimpsest. Nabeel just showed it to us. We have an idea of what was destroyed before Uthman's standardization. Fourthly, Muslims already admit that what we have today does not resemble 100% the pre-Uthmanic copies. We already admit that many of the pre-Uthmanic copies were different due to the 7 ahruf, and that Uthman had to produce a text in a way that allowed as much of the 7 ahruf as possible. Fifthly, Christians who pose this argument are being inconsistent, since they have no visual historical evidence of the New Testament until 125 AD, P52, and that's only for a very small fraction of the Gospel of John. Christians have no visual historical evidence for the early period. And this is crucial because in the early period, that's where New Testament scholars said that was where most of the variants occurred. Refer to D.C. Parker, Bruce Metzger and Bart Ehrman, Charles B. Wheeler, and many other scholars. So the earliest
1 minute.
text that you have for the New Testament is 125 years away. Appealing to faulty translations. Okay, let's see if I have time. Right. He showed you a statement for Ibn Umar, where Ibn Umar say, "Let none of you say I have acquired the whole of the Quran." How does he know what all of it is when much of it has disappeared? Dr. Jibreel Fuad Haddad clarifies what this narration actually means. He says the above refers to a famous saying of Ibn Umar, once again deceptively, ignorantly mistranslated so as to mislead readers to think that it means something other than its actual meaning. How many seconds?
You've got 10 seconds.
Okay, I'm going to save this rebuttal for the next one.
Good idea.
All right.
Good idea. Nabeel, you have 15 minutes.
Sorry.
Go.
No, go.
Yeah.
Chicken
table. Again, never briefest in the place. Yeah. Stop. Reset that to 0. Okay, ready to continue, Nabeel?
All right, I think he did a great job responding to a lot of what I said. He went extremely fast, and I hope that I can cover as much as he covered. I want to start off by reiterating my question, Bassam. I'm really interested in understanding at what point do you say the Qur'an has not been perfectly preserved? What do I have to show you to say the Qur'an has not been perfectly preserved? It's an extremely important question for me. It seems like it's different for everyone, because any general Muslim I'd say, how do I know the Qur'an's not been perfectly preserved? They'd say, show me one variable. And we've seen many. Or they'd say, show me one that's been propagated, and I showed you that. Or they'd say, show me a difference in chapters, and I showed that. So it's what do you want? What do you want to show that this Qur'an has not been perfectly preserved? That's what I want to see. It seems like you're including everything that could possibly happen in the Qur'an as something that is okay. I'm going to go back to the stuff you said in your opening statement that I didn't get to respond to, or that you haven't responded to. You said in order for parts of the Qur'an to be accepted into the Qur'an, it had to be documented, and there had to be eyewitnesses or people who had it memorized, etc., to confirm that. Please show me where that was written. I want to see where it said that the Qur'an had to be found in writing and then confirmed, because everything I've seen says the Qur'an just had to be there, and the rest of parts counts just as well as writing. He says, well, I already talked about that. All right, he talks about skeptic revisionist theories, how they've been discarded. What are those skeptic revisionist theories that have been discarded? Are they the ones that I'm proclaiming? No, the skeptic theories that have been discarded are things such as, oh, the Qur'an was first written in Syriac, or the Qur'an was written hundreds of years after Muhammad died. Those are the theories that have been discarded. The things that I'm saying have not been discarded. Lots of scholars still hold on to the things that I'm saying. He's making it sound as if I'm holding on to some fringe view. That's simply not the case. The modern scholarship in textual criticism of the Qur'an espouses much of what I said, and they even go much further than what I said. He talks about Fogg's palimpsest, and he says this does not reveal a variant text. Again, the point I have for bringing up Fogg's palimpsest is to show that Muhammad's best teacher of the Qur'an disagreed with today's Qur'an. Why is that? Doesn't this provoke some thought? Muhammad's best chosen teacher saying the Qur'an you have today is not the Qur'an that Muhammad revealed? If his best teacher doesn't know what it is, how can we expect other people to know what it is? Bassam says that many people have the Qur'an memorized, and therefore they're going to compare it back and forth between what they already knew and what they had written. According to Yasser Qadhi on page 128 of his book, only 4 people have the Qur'an memorized. Just 4, and that's according to Yasser Qadhi, and he quotes Sahih Bukhari on this. So it seems here that Bassam is using ideas and concepts that have been propagated through tradition, but not necessarily found in the earliest manuscripts. Well, what I have to ask then is, what does it mean when a whole bunch of people who had memorized the Qur'an died in the Battle of Imam? Well, it seems to me that the best explanation of this is that a whole bunch of people who knew the Qur'an extremely well died in the Battle of Imam. When you say memorized, we have, according to Yasser Qadhi, a hadith from Bukhari, which contradicts that. Can't mean memorize the whole thing, only 4 people have memorized. So what does it mean? I think it simply means people who knew it extremely well. If people had it memorized, again, if people had it memorized, just as Bassam asserts, then why the hubbub with making sure that certain scholars get together to write it down the first time and then to edit it later? Why all that to do? If everyone had it memorized, why not just get one person to write it down and go check it with multiple people? That simply did not happen. He says the earliest manuscripts contain the first and last chapters of the Qur'an. Of course they were included. What he did not tell you is that of the catalog manuscripts we have in the 1st century, only 1 includes the first surah. Only 1. Another one contains part of the last verse of the first surah. That's it. Nothing more than that. So if you want 7 verses of the first surah, only 1 catalog manuscript has that. And another manuscript has part of a verse. not the whole thing. He goes on and talks about, well, of course, Ibn Masud must have believed it was part of the Quran. He must have just been emphasizing that everyone knew it, and that's why he didn't include it. That is an ad hoc statement. I mean, I can't imagine anyone using that statement about another book and Muslims accepting it. Oh, he knew it so well that he didn't bother showing that he knew it. That doesn't apply, and that logic just simply does not work. He says Abu Dawood, Sunan Abu Dawood grants Surah 113 and 114. I haven't read this. I'm sincerely asking you to just read it for me so that I know what it is. And if that is the case, then I will accept it. Now, when you talk about Ibn Abi Dawood and you say, oh, well, here it says that people irretrievably lost parts of the Quran, and you're saying, well, that probably meant that people had thought, or he thought people may have lost the Quran. Well, now you're imposing words on the text that simply isn't there. You're assuming it says something which it simply does not say. The text is very clear, and it adds threefold emphasis to the fact that, hey, things have been lost. To simply insert your own words into that meaning is, I would say, distorting what it says. Now, speaking of distortion, you said I distorted what you claimed at the beginning of your speech. You said the words, if Muhammad were alive, he would say no chapter or verse is falsely added to or missing from the Quran. That was your definition of variance. You're saying, basically we're trying to prove that no verse has been added to or chapter has been added to or missing from the Quran. Bassam, I'm not distorting what you say. The logical outpouring of that is that you're allowing verses which distort the meaning. That's not included in your definition. If you want to include that, please revise your definition. But we showed from chapter 3, verse 128, that we have variants which say will surely versus will surely not. A clear distortion of the meaning. In fact, this isn't the only case where this happens. Islamic Awareness, which is a site, a very scholarly Muslim site. Again, when I say scholarly, by the way, I don't mean I agree with everything they say. I mean they're doing their homework well. But a very scholarly Muslim site says about these variants. They say that the variants can affect meaning, but not the overall Islamic thought. I'm going to try to pull this up while I'm talking. That may mean I talk slower. But here's what they're espousing. They're espousing this concept, that the variants that we find in the manuscripts may be something that goes against what the verse actually says. It may change the meaning in the local context. But because of Islamic thought, we know what the original verse actually said. We know that it doesn't affect Islamic thought. That's a concession from Islamic Awareness. I think that's a powerful concession. What are they saying? They're saying there are no changes in the Quran that can't be undone based on what we know about Islamic thought. Well, fine. I agree with that. I have no problem with that statement whatsoever. But what that inevitably means is that the Quran hasn't been perfectly preserved in this manner where we think no words have been changed, or even that words have been changed but not to where they affect the meaning. He's saying the meaning can be affected, but not necessarily the whole meaning of Islamic thought. Guess what? That's what people say about the Bible, by the way. He started talking about the New Testament, and I'll make a parallel here as well. People say the same thing about the Bible. There's no variant in the Bible that affects the meaning of Christian thought. And now we have Islamic Awareness saying the same thing about the Quran. That is my point. And Bassam, I want to make this abundantly clear. I'm not trying to say the Quran is horribly corrupt, and there's no way we can know what was originally said. I'm not trying to say, oh, the Quran is so messed up, we just can't trust it. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the Quran went through the same process of revision and addition that every book goes through. There are variants in there. Chapters were discussed. Some were included, some weren't. Verses, some were included, some weren't. Individual verses. Sometimes we have wills versus will nots. Words, orthographical changes. Every single change we can find in any other book is found in the Quran. There's just a method here by which Muslims say, oh, Allah allows for this. Well, great, you can believe that if you want, but I'm not questioning whether you think Allah allows for that. I'm questioning if this is textually preserved in any significant way other than any other book. And like Bassam has been admitting, no, these changes, abrogations, verses that have been taken out, verses that have been deleted, little verses that have differences in wills and will nots. These things have happened in every book, and they've happened in the Quran, according to everyone on stage who agrees with this. Now, Bassam says I've been espousing double standards. Why need to compare these various verses when they were the basis? In other words, when Uthman burnt the Quran, Why need to compare any of the previously existing verses when those verses were the basis off which the modern Quran exists? In other words, he's saying, well, of course the modern Quran is based off those Qurans, so why do you need to compare them if they were burnt? Who cares? What that implies is that the Quran, the modern Quran, is exactly the same as the earlier Qurans, so who cares? You don't need to compare them. But no, we know they're not exactly the same. If they were exactly the same, they wouldn't have been burnt. So his assertion works both ways. It's a double-edged sword. He's saying, why need to compare them? Of course they were the same. No, they're not the same. We know that from what the texts say. So, he said so much. I hope that if I missed anything, it's not because I'm trying to miss it. Just bring it back up and I'll address it in the next point. I want to go back over my case, things that he didn't address during my case. First, we know that during the Quran, during the process of giving the Quran, we had transmissions, we had various readings, and we had various modes. Understand this. There's 7 ahruf, 7 modes. What are they? No one knows. But there's 7 different modes. And beyond that, there are 10 different qira'at, 10 different dialects within which the Quran could have been presented. What are the exact dialects? Well, some people have an account with their disagreements about the dialects, but there's 10 of them. And then there's different transmissions. There's the Hafs transmission, the Warsh transmission. There's more transmissions. So you have different transmissions, different modes, and you have different recitations. Well, what does someone mean when they come up and say only one version of the Quran? Obviously there are different modes, obviously there are different recitations, obviously there are different transmissions. You have 95% of the Muslim world reading one thing, 3% reading another, 1% in Yemen reading another. So I'm just trying to point out the simple fact that the Quran is like every other book in this regard. I'm not saying it's ridiculously corrupted. I'm just saying it's just like every other book. There's various lines of transmission. There are various words that can be agreed upon and not agreed upon. We have the evidence before us. Another thing I want to point out is at every level that you can check for variants, we find variants. Were there pre-Uthmanic variants? Yes, Bassam has admitted that the Ibn Masud variant found in the Fog's palimpsest was pre-Uthmanic. So before Uthman's time, people disagreed with the modern version of the Quran. And was it just some random person? No, it was the best teacher of the Quran. So that's pre-Uthmanic. And what about post-Uthmanic? Well, we have many records of post-Uthmanic variations. Like I showed you, we have 2 full charts of the Tashkent versus Topkapi variants. So we have variants there. We have a variant found in the Paris manuscript. In fact, I've gotten this from a scholar. He told me to keep him off record, but he said, if you can show in the first 300 years any manuscript that perfectly matches today's Cairo text, please show it. The fact of the matter is, there is no text that matches perfectly the Quran that most people read today for the first 300 years. Not one. Now, the variations might be minor, but there's still variations there. What's the point I'm trying to make? It's horribly flawed? No, it has minor variations that happen in the Bible, that happen in other books. That's all I'm trying to show. And I think Bassam is leaning towards agreeing with me here. I've got 3 more minutes. I want to emphasize the following, and then I'll relinquish back to Bassam. What does one mean when the Quran has been perfectly preserved? No chapter or verse has been falsely added to or missing from the Quran. That's Bassam's quotation. We know that of Muhammad's earliest 4 teachers, we had disagreements on the chapters to include. He says that chapter 1 obviously must be included by Ibn Masud, but every record we have shows that he did not include it. He says 113 and 114. He admits 113 and 114 were disagreed upon by Abdullah ibn Masud. He then says that later in life, Abdullah ibn Masud included it. I think that if Uthman, the Khalifa, comes up to you and says, look, you are causing division within the people, I don't care what you believe, at this point you need to show that you are on our side or you are a dissident against Islam. That kind of pressure can make a man say, okay, I agree. But what was the inclination? What was his scholarly inclination? What was the inclination that he recorded and propagated to his students? That there was no chapter 113 and 114 in the Quran. And I would also like to see if those records, which you quote saying that he ultimately did include them, were early. I have no doubt that people later probably said that. But I want to see early records where Ibn Masud included those. So he says, if Muhammad were alive, he would say no chapter or verse has been falsely added to or missing from the Quran. We know 2 out of the 4 teachers disagreed with a number of chapters, so he's already wrong there. No verse. We have records of hundreds of verses missing from Surah 33 that should be there. We have records of the verse of stoning. Omar says it should be included. We have records of the verse of suckling. Aisha says it should be included. What about stuff that's included that shouldn't be? We have verses from Khuzaimah that says that he was the only one who knew verses of the Quran, so it wasn't mutawatir. That shouldn't be included.
1 minute.
So in essence, every single criteria he has provided fails. Chapters, disagreements. Verses, disagreements. And I'd say even that definition falls horribly short because it allows for distortion within verses, and we find distortion within verses. So just to pose it back to you, Bassam, I just really want to hear, what is it that makes the Quran perfectly, if there's something that would make it not perfectly preserved, please show that, or tell me what that is, and show me the early sources for these things that you were asserting, not late sources from late commentators, but early sources from within the first few centuries of Islam. Thanks.
You've got 8 minutes.
Okay, I still have 7 arguments left from his opening statement to address, but let me just comment on a few things he just said right now. Regarding that Sahih Bukhari narration does not say that only 4 people had memorized the Quran. It says in the Arabic, only 4 did jama' of the Quran. And jama' in the Quranic sciences can mean 2 things. Either bringing the Quran together orally or in one's mind, or bringing it together in written form or in a book. And Ahmed von Denver gives 5 different ways of how to understand Jama' in Quran. So it doesn't clearly state that only 4 people have memorized it. You said if everyone had memorized it, why did they bother to write it down? I never said that everyone had the Quran fully memorized. There were still a few memorizers left, but because the Muslims were engaging in war, you never knew what would have happened. So they wanted to take more precaution. You said the Ibn Mas'ud's explanations on Fatiha are ad hoc, but at the end of the day, I did say Prophet Muhammad said that Fatiha is a revelation of the Quran. And who did you use to appeal to Ibn Mas'ud? You're like, Prophet Muhammad said Ibn Mas'ud is one of the 4 best reciters. But Prophet Muhammad said Fatiha is from the Quran, so you should accept what Prophet Muhammad said. Ibn Mas'ud, you saying granting 113, 114. We have, for our 10 qira'at, we do have multiple chains of transmission. We have the isnads showing that, and for 3 of his readings, we do have that in Surah 113, 114 is there. And even Imam al-Baqalani, Ibn Hazm said, today we recite the reading of Ibn Mas'ud, and it's exactly as we have it today. You said that I distorted the narration from Ibn Abi Dawud on Yamama. I won't blame you because I was speaking fast. No, what I said was that the narration is weak, and that the authentic narration, which is in Sahih al-Bukhari, says that there was a fear of this happening. So that's what I said. You're like, Hafs and Warsh, various lines of transmission. That's what my whole opening statement was about. In Islam, we believe in textually inspired variants. The qira'at and the Hafs and Warsh, they all go back to Prophet Muhammad's time. The companions recited it that way. He approved of it. These variants are inspired, we believe in them, and these variants are inspired, and we believe in them. That's the whole point. Why do you think I was admitting that there are variants? Because I believe that they're all from God. That's why I spent all my time explaining what 7 ahruf were. You're like, no, my theories have not been discarded. Well, who I was quoting was Angelica Neuwirth, one of Germany's most renowned Quranic experts. And right after she said that, she said, new findings of Quranic fragments, moreover, could be adduced to affirm, rather call into question, the traditional picture of the Quran as an early fixed text composed of the surahs we have. Do you agree with Angelica? Now let me go back to some of the arguments in your opening statement. I'm still on the fallacy appealing to faulty translations. Regarding, he's saying that Ibn Omar said some of the Quran has been lost. Dr. Jibreel Fuad Haddad says that this is a very faulty translation. The words, he says, the words used by Ibn Omar for the terms given as acquired, disappeared, and what has survived above were respectively ahatu, fatahu, wa ma tayassara minhu. The actual meaning of Ibn Omar's words is, let no one say, I've encompassed the whole of the Quran, meaning its meanings. How does he know what all of it is when much of the Quran escapes him? Rather, let him say, I have encompassed whatever amount of it has been facilitated for me to know. He was not referring to the collection of the Quran, but only to the ethics of the exegetes. And I agree with Jibril that after looking at the Arabic text, I think this is the better translation. Another narration where he appealed to a faulty translation. It's in regards to the narration that he cited for you, where Ibn Mas'ud told the people of Iraq to refuse giving in their manuscripts to not copy the manuscripts of Uthman. Ibn Mas'ud said, avoid copying the Mus'haf and recitation of this man. It's a faulty translation. The Arabic word is actually u'zal, and the whole phrase actually means I am exempted from writing down the Mus'haf and is assigned to a man. What Ibn Mas'ud is really talking about is that Uthman did not choose me to be part of the committee, and instead Zayd, someone else was selected. He's talking about Zayd in context. So again, I don't blame Nabeel. I think this is a horrible translation. I don't blame him. But when you really look at the Arabic, it is not saying that. And if Ibn Mas'ud was trying to say that, he would have used the word i'tazilu and not follow it with a preposition. Mishandling the narration. Umar and the verse of stoning. Okay, first of all, nowhere does Umar bin Khattab say that the verse of stoning wasn't abrogated and that it's still considered part of the Quranic text. Secondly, Umar's statement indirectly shows that he believed that the narration was abrogated. Look, he says, I'm afraid that after a long time has passed, people may say, we do not find the verses of stoning to death in the holy book. What he was afraid of was that in the future, people who are going to come and they're going to say, since the ruling is not found in the Qur'an, that means we don't have to abide by it. And surely we do have these kind of Muslims today, especially if they are Qur'an-only Muslims and they reject Hadith. That is one of the wisdoms behind abrogation of the recitation of the text and keeping its legal rulings, testing those who want to abide by the Sunnah. So why didn't Umar say, I'm afraid in the future people will say we don't find the verses of punishing the thief in the Qur'an? Why didn't he say that about anything else? That's because he knew the verse of stoning was abrogated. And if he really did believe it was part of the Qur'an, how come when he was second caliph, he didn't force the people to include it back into the Qur'an? Al-Hafid bin al-Khal, this is important. He said that Ubay bin Ka'b believed in 2 extra surahs. First of all, none of the narrations say that Ubay believed that Hafid bin Khal were surahs. None of them. Secondly, these 2 alleged surahs are known to be supplications, dua, due to other narrations that we have, dua al-Qunut. Thirdly, the companions were known for including text in their codices, even though they didn't believe it was inspired. This shouldn't come as a surprise to Christians like Nabeel, who have no problem believing that uninspired books like the Shepherd of Hermas or the Epistle of Barnabas were part of Codex Sinaiticus. Fourthly, is the crucial part. Ubay was part of the committee appointed by Uthman. And we don't see him arguing with the other members of the committee that these 2 alleged surahs should be included into the Uthmanic text. Surely if he believed that these surahs were not abrogated and inspired by Allah, then we would expect to have some record of him disputing with the other members in the committee. And we know that he did not, even if we assume that he did believe that those 2 Hafid bin Khal were surahs, we know he didn't die upon it because we have his reading transmitted to us through Nafi' ibn Kathir and Abu Amro, and they do not include the Hafid bin al-Khal.
Okay, Nabeel has 8 minutes counter rebuttal.
All right, this is great. We're covering a lot of ground. There's a lot of stuff that's being discussed here that I've never seen discussed before, so this is really good. I really would like you to tell me, Bassam, what constitutes the Quran not being perfectly preserved. I asked, this is I think my 4th time asking, and my first few times, I guess, I just figured you'd respond to it at some point. But now I'm really interested. This means a lot. At what point does the Quran become not perfectly preserved? Please tell me, otherwise I'm going to have to assume that you're just avoiding the question. I'm going back to some of the stuff you stated I didn't get to respond to. You said, doesn't the abrogation, you said abrogation, changing the word of God, so that doesn't matter. You said it doesn't matter what you say about abrogation. It's part of Islam and it's okay. I say no, there is a big problem, because according to the Islamic theology, there should be perfect preservation. The reason this applies is because the idea of perfect preservation has to be consistent. And in Islamic theology, there's a tablet of the Qur'an in heaven. And I assume that you expect the definition of perfect preservation, since you haven't shared it with me yet, including what would disprove it. I'm assuming that you would include this concept of the tablet in heaven. Unless you explicitly deny that, please let me know. But if you're going with the Qur'an here, and there's a tablet in heaven, which can show what the text of the Qur'an is, how could it be possible that both the abrogated and the unabrogated verses are all in there? You said there's an eternality of the words, not the eternality of application. Well, once you show that the Qur'an, if the Qur'an in the tablet of heaven has eternality of the words, then the words are still there in that Qur'an and not in the Qur'an today. They're not considered or revered as words of God. So you have a problem here. It's related because it talks about the preservation. Now, I also want to mention this. This is extremely interesting. I mentioned a hadith where Ubay ibn Ka'b shows that there is two statements: life-giving and all-hearing, all-powerful and all-hearing, versus all-knowing, etc. He says, well, both of these are equally health-giving, and therefore they fall under the same ahruf. Well, what gives him the right to say that the ahruf are just how much health is given by these verses? Where does he have that statement? It doesn't seem like any of the early scholars said anything of that nature. And now it seems the criterion of preservation is not based on words. It's not based on what's actually written. It's based on that health-giving factor. This just doesn't fit with anything we're talking about with preservation. He takes offense when I talk about Surah 92. He's saying it's authentic, but it's ahad. Basically, it's only shown by Ibn Masud and those people who were talking about it in the Hadith. Don't forget, this is where Abu Darda says, tell me how Ibn Masud reads the beginning of Surah 92. Ibn Masud read it differently, and Abu Darda says, that's how I read it. He says, yes, this is authentic, but it's just one person. They could be mistaken. Do you hear what he's saying? Do you hear what he's conceded? The early best companions and the best teacher of the Qur'an can be mistaken on what the Qur'an actually taught. So I just take issue with this concept that everyone knew the Qur'an extremely well to the point where there was no real dissension. He's saying not everyone knew it perfectly. Okay, good. I'm glad he's conceded that. But I'm telling you, in important ways that meant things to people, the best of the companions disagreed on the Qur'an, and they disagreed together, which shows that there was real problems there. Ultimately, what cannot be argued is that the words here were exactly the same. Everyone knew them. He has to concede that certain people didn't know, and he has to concede that those were the teachers. That's my biggest point, and he's conceded that. But I think he hasn't realized the full scope of what he's saying, that if the earliest people and the best people didn't know what was part of the Quran, we got problems. Talking about Abu Dawud, you said it grants Surah 113 and 114. I don't think you're lying. I don't think you're being deceptive. I just want to hear it. I just want to hear this hadith. If you don't mind sharing it, I want to hear where Abu Dawud says Surah 113 and 114 was granted. Also, with Muhammad, you said Muhammad granted the Surah Al-Fatiha. I find that extremely interesting. I wasn't able to find that. If I were able to find it, I would modify my argument some. So if you could please share that as well. Where did Muhammad say Surah Al-Fatiha was granted? And even if Muhammad did say that, you still have the same problem. His chosen teacher of the Quran didn't include it. So I just want to point out, well, let me continue covering this. Muhammad's statement about Fatiha I just talked about. Fear of losing the Quran versus really lost it. He says, oh, you're narrating something where it shows Ibn Umar talking about a fear of losing the Quran. Whereas in Sahih Bukhari, where Ibn Umar says we've actually lost the Quran. Whereas in Sahih Bukhari, it clarifies there was just a fear of losing the Quran. I don't think that's a clarification. I think that's they don't contradict each other. Now, if the two ahadith contradicted each other, one said one thing, one said another, then I would say, okay, I'll pick Sahih Bukhari because Bukhari is renowned to be more solid. However, these aren't contradicting each other. You can fear losing things and actually lose them. They're not contradictory. So I think that reconciliation doesn't work. Bassam has admitted, he says, my whole opening statement was about hafs and wajh and various things that were allowed by Allah to propagate through Islam. Why didn't you get this? No, I do get that. I do get that. All I'm pointing out is that you have in the Quran various verses, various versions of the text that come down. They're not the same. People can disagree on them. People can say this one's better, some people can say that one's better. You have various words. There is no one text. It's not the same thing that's in heaven. It's not the same thing that Muslims believe that the Quran is. You have variations. He agrees. He says, oh, there's hafs and there's warsh, but it's allowed by God. Okay, if that's how you want to explain it, sure, but you have to agree there's differences in these words and these texts. You conceded that. I think we agree on that. You said you were quoting Angelica. I'm sorry, I guess I was running too slowly. I didn't catch the statement. If you'd like to repeat it, I'll let you know what I think about it. Ibn Umar, you said no one fully understands what was being said. You quoted Ibn Umar, where Ibn Umar says, let no one say he has the whole Quran. And you said Ibn Umar is talking about, oh, no one fully understands it. Well, I have to disagree. The reason why is because Abu Ubay, who was the last person, or the first person, if you will, in that chain of transmission, specifically quoted this verse because he was talking about variance. He was talking about variance, and then he inserted this quotation about this. And therefore, it's not about, oh, no one had full knowledge. No, the context is talking about variance, and then he quotes this saying not everyone has the whole Quran. So I have to disagree with you on that.
1 minute, Nabeel.
You say Umar knew the verse of stoning was abrogated. If not, why didn't he force it back into the Quran? He was the Khalifa. That's my point. Umar says this is part of the Quran. Al-Suyuti records him as saying, I would write it back into the Quran if I could. I don't want people to accuse me of adding to the Quran. So you've shown my point, and you showed it excellently well. Thank you for that. I think the conclusion here is I want to show everyone what's happening. He's making it sound as if I think the Quran has been horribly corrupted. It's not trustworthy in any regards. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the Quran is simply a book, just like every other book, which has variations, it has changes, it has transmissions, it has modes, it has dialectical recitations, just like every other book does. That's all I'm trying to show. And his concessions are repeatedly agreeing with me that yes, there are different transmissions. Yes, there were pre-Uthmanic variants and post-Uthmanic variants. Yes, 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 yes is what he's saying to me. I think he's agreed with my case.
Bassam to give a counter rebuttal, indeed. 8 minutes each, and then Nabeel will finish, and then we're going to go to a Q&A session. So if you have any of your questions prepared or comments, even. Okay.
Right, thanks, Nabeel. Okay, you want me to read out the sunnah with narration to you? This is what it says. Uqba narrated, I was driving the she-camel of the Apostle of Allah during a journey. He said to me, Uqba, should I not teach you 2 best surahs ever recited? He then taught me, say, I seek refuge in the Lord of the Dawn, that's 113, and say, I seek refuge in the Lord of Men, that's 114. You told me to tell you how you could falsify the Quran for me. I'll give you 4 ways. 1. Show that several companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, claim that parts of the Quran that were meant to be part of the preserved Quran for future generations were lost. 2. Show that several companions of the Prophet claim that non-Quranic editions were introduced into the Quran's final compilation and were accepted by the people as Quran. 3. Show that several companions fought with each other and accused each other of tampering with the Quran and denying that what the other person said was Quranic was indeed Quranic. 4. Show that all the companions conspired to tamper with the Quran and falsify passages intentionally. So these are just 4 of many ways that you could convince me that the Quran has been corrupted. Regarding, you said in your opening statement that Zayd said that he only found one of the surahs with Ibn Abi Khuzaymah. Okay, good. Yeah, you asked me to show you proof. Where did Abu Bakr say, get it documented first and then get 2 witnesses? One proof is in Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani's Fath al-Bari. He has a narration showing that. But I'm going to be honest and say the narration is disconnected. So I'm not going to use that as my main argument. My main argument would be that Imam Layth ibn Sa'd, who lived in the 1st century, and Imam al-Harith al-Mahasibi, who lived in the 1st century as well, were 2 scholars who only lived a generation away and said that this is the way that the Quran has been compiled. So we have early testimony in the 1st century. That's what you wanted. And further proof, from the hadith itself, you could know this. How do you know this? Zayd said, when we wrote the Holy Quran, I missed one of the verses of Surah Al-Ahzab, which I used to hear Allah's Apostle reciting. Then we searched for it and found it with Khuzaymah bin Thabit. Notice what the narration is saying. Zayd is already admitting that he knows about a verse that he used to recite. Then he said, we're going to go search for it. Well, why are you going to search for something that you already know? It clearly means that you want to search for it in documented form. Oh yeah, and you committed a gross factual error. Even though it wasn't a very big deal, but you did commit a factual error. You said that Mu'adh and Ubay were dead by the time of Uthman's collection. It's not true. Mu'adh was living in Syria, and Ubay was one of the people in the committee selected by Uthman.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's enough with all the opening statements. Okay, let's start looking at some of the stuff I couldn't capture. You're like, the verse coming down, Surah 16:107, teaching obligation came after Muhammad allowed it. But you have to remember that Muslims believe that the Prophet received ilham, inspiration, and wahi, revelation. He could have been inspired to say such a thing before the revelation of the Qur'an. He said, Bassam doesn't take the position dialects and only synonyms. No, I take two positions. I mentioned that in my opening statement. How do I know that it's the maximum number of the ahruf? I know this because Uthman told Zayd and the people in the committee, write out the Qur'an in a way so that you could maximize as much of the recitation as possible. However, if you differ with one another, then only write it in the Qureshi. So that's my proof that it wasn't full 7 ahruf preserved, and it's my proof that only one of the ahruf, it's not only one of the ahruf that was taken. He's like, what authority does Uthman have to destroy any of them? Doesn't destroying the ahruf mean destroying God's word? I already said that one ahruf was good enough and that it could represent the entire Qur'an. Because the Prophet said, recite of it whichever you want. So we're not obliged to recite all 7. So taking one is enough for you. So even if all the Muslims in the world said, let's only recite this one harf, we won't be condemned, Islamically speaking. And no, it doesn't mean you're destroying God's word, because we already have the entire Qur'an through any of the ahruf that we have preserved. Like, why didn't they copy Hafsa's? Why didn't they just use Abu Bakr's manuscript? Why write out the copies again? Because, well, my assumption would be is because Abu Bakr initially collected the Qur'an in 7 ahruf, and that's not what Uthman wanted. And he said, you're distorting, you're saying, I said that the early companions were wrong about the Surah 92 variant. I did not say that. I said that the reason why it's different is because it was probably according to Ibn Mas'ud's old reading, according to the Hudayl Haf. Ibn Mas'ud was reciting according to a certain Haf. Then after Uthman standardized the text, he abided by the new Uthmanic text. So these narrations that Nabeel is showing, Ibn Mas'ud did this and that was according to his old Haf before he agreed with Uthman's. He says, what gives him the right to say health giving? It's the Prophet ﷺ, Prophet who said, each mode is sufficiently health giving. What the Prophet meant is that each of these 7 modes is good enough. So they're inspired. We have the authority from our Prophet. What more do Muslims want? Prophet Muhammad said it's okay. Regarding the tablets, I'm not going to answer because I think it's philosophical. If I have time, I'll answer again. The Surah 3:128 distortion. I really don't know, Nabeel, because I didn't study the variant on this specific verse. My general response to any variants that you might bring is this. First of all, are these variants present in our qira'at? If they are, then great. That means the Prophet approved of them because we have multiple isnads of our qira'at going back to the Prophet's time. If not, then an investigation will be done. Is it a scribal error? If it's a scribal error, and it didn't enter into our transmission, no one has recited it, and only one manuscript had it, that's probably a scribal error. Then we could brush it aside as that. Or did it used to be part of the 7 ahruf, and then it didn't make its way through Uthman's text? So I don't know the answer on Surah 3:128. I'll be honest with you on that, but that'll be my general response. That'll be the steps that I take to find out. You said, okay. And you're like critical scholarship. You said, I have critical scholarship on my side. There's one scholar, I'm not going to name him. Okay, so how am I going to respond back to that? So what is your critical scholarship? And what's the name of this friend of yours who's so scared of me?
I have 1 minute to make.
Okay, you know what? If there's anything that you refuted, I'm going to admit this one. Yes, because Abu Ubayd cited Ibn Umar's narration in that context, I'm going to admit that G.F. Haddad's rebuttal explanation is not valid. But I personally have another explanation for that, and that what Ibn Umar was talking about was, don't say that you have the entire, all the verses that were claimed to be Qur'an, don't say that you have them with you, because we believe in abrogation. So don't say that you have collected all of the Qur'an that was meant to be collected. And you said, Umar said that he wanted to add it to the Qur'an, but he said what the reason was. He said that I'm afraid that people will come in the future and say, because we don't find it in the Qur'an, we can't implement this law. That's what he said. He didn't say, I want to put it back in the Qur'an because people said it's obligated and I disagree with them. That's the point that you're supposed to show. Thank you.
Nabeel, you have 8 minutes in your final counter rebuttal. And we go to question and answers after that, after Nabeel has finished.
All right. I appreciate his response again. A lot of things have been enlightened. I especially like that he and I are both conceding points. Usually when you have debates and people just stand their ground, I've conceded various points, he's conceded various points. And I said at the beginning of the debate, I thought that was going to happen because this is a debate where none of this has really been discussed in public forum before. So I appreciate your candor and honesty. I'm glad we can move through this academically with honesty. You said Abu Dawood records 113 and 114 being officially the word of the Quran. Okay, good. Thanks for that. Later, I would like to get that exact source from you. I believe it's there. However, it still shows that there was disagreement amongst the earliest scholars. Even if Ibn Masud was wrong, let's say he was wrong as he's asserting, and we only have one assertion that he's wrong from Abu Dawood. But even if he is wrong, guess what? That's still Muhammad's greatest teacher on the Quran, disagreeing on the number of chapters. I may have said this like 6 or 7 times by now, but it doesn't seem like he's willing to concede that. He hasn't said it yet. He said, yes, Ibn Masud thought that, but it was actually part of the Quran. Okay, great. So why don't you make the logical conclusion? Please just state it. Ibn Masud was wrong. The early scholars were wrong. The best early scholars were wrong. So I just want to hear him actually take it to that conclusion. He agrees with me. I agree with him. It's just that he's not concluding to the right point. He's talking about Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani saying he was the one who said, oh, you need it written. He agrees that this is not good reasoning. I thank him for conceding that point. He was whom I mentioned, by the way, when I said no one said that before the 15th century. That was al-Asqalani, who I was referring to. Then he says, but there were 2 scholars in the 1st century, just a generation apart, who said that this was documented proof. You didn't give me the source for that. I want to see...
Suyuti.
Suyuti?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I will look into that. Thank you for that. Then you went through the criteria where it stated, you said, this is what I need to be shown in order for the Qur'an to have been not perfectly preserved. You went through it killer fast. I only got the last 2. That people fought and argued with each other. So the companions would fight and argue with each other. And number 4, that they falsified stuff. Show that they falsified stuff intentionally. Understand what I'm saying. Number 4 just is not something I'm going for. I don't think anyone did any of this intentionally. The Muslims revered the Qur'an to such a high degree that it's to the point where it's almost perfect like Allah Himself. I'm not saying that they deified the Qur'an, but it's really a high degree of reverence. So I'm not saying anyone intentionally did anything. So number 4, I'll just have to disagree with right off the bat. But number 3, where you said, show me where people fought about these things, I'm showing you over and over again. Ibn Masud disagreed with people when he was told to give up and relinquish his Qur'an. He didn't include the same chapters. He said in Tirmidhi, maintain your Qur'ans, don't go with the Musaf of Uthman. So here we have someone actually meeting, not just anyone, the chief teacher of the Qur'an, meeting the exact criteria that you wanted to show the Qur'an has not been perfectly preserved. And that's my point. When you actually state these criteria, we'll be able to find them being met. You said Zayd, of course, already knew the verse. That's why he searched for the presence of that verse with Khuzaymah. I would say this. I would say, this is a common psychological phenomenon. People can remember that there is something, but they don't know the whole details of it. For example, he could say, weren't there 2 more verses to the end of that surah? I know there are, I have a general idea, let me see if I can find someone who has the exact verses. Now the reason I can say this is because we know, historically, people forgot verses all the time. Muhammad himself is recorded in Sahih Bukhari as saying, I forgot a certain verse. It also shows in other sources Muhammad saying, where is Ubay? He was reading the Salat in the masjid. And he says, where is Ubay after the Salat is over? Ubay says, I'm here. And he says, why didn't you remind me about the verse I forgot? And Ubay says, oh, when you didn't read it, I thought it had been abrogated. So here, Muhammad, on multiple accounts, we see Muhammad saying he's forgotten the Quran. It's very possible that people did not remember this verse. Zayd ibn Thabit specifically is mentioned. It's very possible he forgot a verse. If Muhammad forgets verses, so can Zayd. And he says, I know this verse exists, I just can't remember it. Let me look for it. And they find it with Abu Khuzaymah, they found it with no one but him. So your explanation doesn't necessitate that you're right. And I think the actual words and my possible explanation make my explanation more strong. You said Ubay was alive and Mu'adh was alive. I'll tell you, the source that I searched, that I got this from, that Ubay was dead, this was the reason that was given. Mu'adh had been sent by Umar to go to Syria to teach the Qur'an. At this point, Ubay was sick right before his death. So that's why they didn't send Ubay. They sent Mu'adh instead because Ubay was sick. And they sent 2 other people as well. They go to Syria to teach the Qur'an while he was there. So Mu'adh was in Syria teaching the Qur'an, at which point he died. He dies in Syria. There's no mention of Uthman reporting the Qur'an before Mu'adh's death. And we know Ubay died before Mu'adh. So that's why I'm saying they were all dead. If you say that they were alive, could you please read to me where they were alive? This was my own research. So if,
Do you have your sources?
I'll look for it later. But this was my own research, so if you can show me they were still alive, great. However, it would still conclude 2 things. Number 1, Ubay was sick to the point of not being able to teach the Quran anymore, and Mu'adh was in Syria. In both cases, no one was present to respond to Uthman's Quran. So to say, oh, why weren't people responding? We still have that fulfilled. We still have that met. Mu'adh wasn't there. Ubay was too sick to do anything about it. However, I think the proper conclusion is that they were both dead. If you show me sources to say otherwise, I would thank you for that, but I wouldn't contradict my position. You're saying 1 ahruf is good enough. Muhammad himself said 1 ahruf is good enough. It's health-giving. You can use that 1 ahruf. Any mode you use is okay. I'm not contradicting that, Bassam. If Muhammad said that, great, he said that. But him saying 1 ahruf is good enough is not equal to saying you can destroy the others. It's you can follow 1, sure, that's good enough for you, but these are also the Word of God. It does not give him the right to destroy these other words of God. It doesn't logically follow, it's non-secular. You're saying Ibn Masud followed an old harf. Well, what we see from all the sources over and over again is Ibn Masud saying, this is the way I heard it from Muhammad's mouth. He says, when Zayd was still in the loins of a disbeliever, I heard from Muhammad's mouth 70 verses, which I memorized. So over and over again, Ibn Masud is saying things that show he disagreed with the final version of the Qur'an. He disagreed with Zayd's Qur'an. He says it so many times, it's found in so many sources, that I find it shocking that you can simply gloss over them. So to say, oh, but that was the old harf, then he agreed to this new harf, I would like to see at least as many sources which say he agreed, and I don't think you've shared those sources with us. Finally, I just want to comment briefly on, and I do want to mention the critical scholars. He misrepresented what I said, but let me focus on this for now. Chapter 3, verse 128 of the Quran, he says he really doesn't know about this, and I respect his honesty again. I will gladly show him after the debate is over what I'm talking about. The Paris manuscript has not been widely published, so I didn't expect him really to know what I was talking about, but that's why I showed it on the screen. He says, I would approach it this way. Are those variations currently present? If so, was it propagated? If not, was it just a scribal error? Notice, he's telling us scribal errors are okay in the Quran. That's one of my main points here. That's one of my main points. As far as, I guess I lost the audience here. My time's up. So we'll talk about things in the question-answer session. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Right, we started half an hour late. I think if we finish at 4, unless there's any strong reason to dissent from that, we can have a Q&A session and the 2 speakers can sum up. So will anyone put the questions or comments to either of the speakers, please? Little girl is putting her hand up. She's a very, very bright girl. Okay. Yes, Bassam, please.
It's quite interesting to hear Ibn Mas'ud that he didn't include Surah number 1, Surah Fatiha is Musaf, that after Jeffrey, in his monumental work, textual history, materials of textual history of the Qur'an, he actually cites variants from the same surah. So if Ibn Mas'ud did not include Surah Fatiha, or did not recite Surah Fatiha as part of the Qur'an, how does he have variants within the surah?
So you're saying Arthur Jeffrey quoted Ibn Mas'ud's variants from Fatiha?
Absolutely.
So I'm answering Islam too.
Answering Islam that he, okay, well, I'll take a look into that.
Okay, fair point. Any more questions or comments at all? Father Frank? No? The gentleman sitting in front of him with the glasses?
I'm just curious why you're not wanting to deal with the philosophical arguments.
It's not related to the topic.
But the fact
Because what he's trying to show is that
Get the
he's trying
mic.
to show.
Get the mic.
Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't realize you couldn't hear.
Yeah. I mean, I actually am willing, but what I'm saying is that I'm going to keep it to the end. If I address everything, then I would address it because it's really not related. Because basically, what Nabeel is trying to say is that I find your concept of preservation to be logically incoherent. So here, what I'm trying to argue is that the Qur'an has been preserved the way Islam says it should, and that's what will keep all Muslims satisfied. But he's coming and saying your concept and understanding of preservation I find to be logically incoherent. I think that is a different topic. Because I'm trying to show, according to Islam, this is what we're supposed to have. He's trying to say, I don't find that to be logical. I think it's off topic. But if I do have time, I would address it. Do you want me to address it?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, fine. Is there a limit on...
No, go ahead.
No, but basically what I was trying to tell Nabeel is that Nabeel, I gave my response. I said that God does not abrogate its existence, but its application. Nabeel is saying, yeah, but at the end of the day, you have this verse saying, don't drink alcohol, and this other verse saying, don't drink alcohol if you're going to prayer, and they're there together. Isn't that a contradiction? No, because not both of them are being applied at the same time. After the day of judgment, almost all of these verses in the Qur'an are not going to be applicable anymore. I'm not going to fast in Ramadan in paradise. I'm not going to perform Hajj in paradise. But I still believe that they emanate from the eternal attribute of God, which is His speech. But I don't believe that they are going to be applied for eternity. So I don't see anything logically incoherent about that. And even if you still don't find it convincing, I'm still going to say it's not related to this topic.
Good perspective. Father Frank?
Sorry, Bassam, I've got you down here as saying in your first half, every single Muslim agreed with a version of Usman. I hope I've got it right.
Yeah.
Well, that every single Muslim is a very large set. And in order to know that everybody agreed, you would have to have evidence that every single Muslim has been questioned. Now, if you said there is no evidence that anybody disagreed, I would go along with you if that is the case. But that would be an argument from silence.
Yeah.
And an argument from silence, logical, is a very weak argument.
Do you know Dr. William Lane Craig?
Tell me.
Okay, well, he's one of the world's renowned, he's a world-renowned Christian apologist, and he said, sometimes the absence of evidence does constitute evidence of absence. Absence of evidence for entity X constitutes evidence of absence for entity X only if you were to expect to see evidence for entity X if it were to exist. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that if there were disagreements, we would definitely expect to see evidence for it. Because the early Muslims were known for narrating almost every single detail from anyone. We even know how many gray hairs the Prophet, peace be upon him, had on his beard. What more detail than you want than that?
How many was that?
Okay. Okay. It's there in the narration, okay? But the point I'm trying to say is that taking into consideration the behavior of the early Muslims and how they used to narrate from the smallest, finest details I would surely expect to see that there would have been narrations talking about disputes.
But it's still different from saying every statement
Argument
in
from
a kind
silence
of...
could be a valid positive argument. I understand where you're coming from. The statement that philosophers say is absence of evidence does not necessarily imply evidence of absence. However, sometimes it could, and I honestly believe, because taking into consideration the early Muslims and how they narrated, I think you would agree with me, surely if there did exist such a matter, it would have been narrated down to us.
Yes, sir.
Hi, I'd like to ask about the Ayatul Rajab, the verse of stoning, please. You say that Umar, he claimed that because we couldn't find the verse anymore in the Qur'an, later generations would not practice it. And this ties back to the incident of the goat eating the verse and thus making it abrogated. The goat ate the verse after the Prophet died. So what authority does the goat have to abrogate?
Okay, I'm sure you came up to my first rebuttal. I'm sure I took care of that. First of all, Umar bin Khattab, when he said, I want to include the narration of the stoning into the Qur'an, that assumes that he already knew what it was. The goat eating that manuscript is not proof that it ate the only manuscript that contained this verse, nor does it mean that it messed up the memories of those who memorized the verse. And my friend, I have the verse of stoning with me today. I can show it to you.
So
I have it.
Could you please,
So,
I'm sorry, could you please interpret that hadith
about the goat?
about the goat?
That's my friend, right in front of you. My friend. That's what I'm talking about. We have every detail being narrated down to us. Even Aisha bothered to say, a goat came into the room and ate this manuscript.
Right.
That's all that it says. You can't read more into it. So when Umar bin Khattab said, I want to have it included into the Qur'an, it's crucial. Because he said, I'm worried that people will not implement it anymore. What Nabeel is trying to say is that Umar wanted to include it because he thought it was still part of the Quranic text and not abrogated.
So
that's what Umar did not say that. That's what Nabeel has to show.
Right, so what is the significance of the goat eating?
There is no significance. What is the significance of the Prophet? We know that the Prophet urinated standing up. What's the significance to that? I know that the Prophet didn't like eating lizards. What's the significance to that? That's why I'm saying, if there are no narrations about a dispute, it is good evidence that it didn't happen because they narrated every little detail down to us.
Pointlessly, you mean, yeah? So it was a pointless narration.
Pointless and pointful.
Are there any questions on a non-goat related subject? Please. For Nabeel, any questions for Nabeel particularly? Yes, Ansel?
Sorry, thank you for allowing me to ask a question again. I found quite interesting your remark that Bassam has come up with sort of presentation about Quranic preservation, which is in sharp contrast with the general idea that is held by the majority of the Muslims. That Muslims believe the Quran is preserved even to the word and so on and so forth. But that is exactly the case. If you compare the qira'at, say the 7 or the 10, the qira'at that we say mutawatir, take the examples of Hafs. The readings of Hafs, or the qira'ah of Hafs, is it any different in London, or in Egypt, or in Sudan, or in Somalia, any part of the globe? This particular reading, word for word, letter for letter, sound for sound, is recited exactly the same. So when we Muslims say the Quran has been preserved, we can say that the Quran has been preserved in each qira'ah, and each qira'ah that we accept as from God is qira'ah that has a correct chain of narrations back to the Prophet in multiple chains of transmission. If you compare the qira'ah, reading of Warsh, which you cited earlier, this is exactly the case with this reading as well. Warsh qira'ah is recited wherever it's recited, because people in central London, they recite Warsh qira'ah as well. If you compare this Warsh qira'ah, whether it's in manuscripts or reading, it's recited exactly word for word, letter for letter, sound for sound, in all part of the Muslim globe. That's what we mean by Quranic preservation, perfect preservation.
Can I ask a clarification? Are you saying it's pronounced the same within that within that transmission? Like
Every single qira'ah on its own has been preserved.
on its own?
Down to this day on its own as well.
On its own. Okay. See, I think this is where we seem to have come to an impasse. There's a lot of things I'm not disagreeing with. I'm just clarifying that they're here. And if people laughed when I said this, but I'm just trying to emphasize a few points. The fact that he agrees with me on these points shows that what I tried to do has been done. For example, I tried to show that there are different words, different letters, and whatnot that can be used within the Quran. He said it's okay, because we have different transmissions, Hafs and Warsh. I'm saying, okay, good. Thanks for conceding what I had already wanted to have been said. That's it. I just wanted to show that there were different words, different letters, different ways that the Quran has been transmitted. So you're saying, oh, it's okay. Within that transmission, it's the same everywhere and always. Okay, but I'm saying that there's multiple transmissions. When that is what is indicative of other books. We have multiple transmissions of other books. For example, the biblical texts. We have families, we have Alexandrian families, Byzantine families, Western families of the Bible. So we have different transmissions. I'm just trying to show the Quran is the same.
Are they of equal status in its authenticity and acceptability? Because in the Quran, I'm sure you know, each qira'ah, each recitations are of equal status. We don't delegate them to a footnote. But if you look at the Alexandrian and the Byzantine texts you mentioned, they're not of equal status. So the Quran is unlike any other book on this issue.
I think you're drawing a false parallel here. In the case of
Exactly.
No, in the case of the different transmissions in the Bible, we don't need to have divine command on how to observe these different transmissions. We can deduce from our own intellect what we think about these transmissions. I think when historians apply that same criteria, which they apply to every other book, to the Quran, they come up with the same conclusions. Now, if you're going to a theological position where, oh, in Islam it's okay to have these different transmissions, I'm saying that's separate, just like he's saying. That's a theological issue. I'm talking about the textual issues, and textually speaking, it's the same phenomenon.
Okay, we're now going to move to the closing statements. Bassam will start with his 5 minutes closing statement, followed by Nabeel, and then we will break. For those of us who are coming back, just to remind you, our grand finale starts at 5:15, same place here at 5:15. Thank you.
Okay, you're asking for the narration, the source for Ubay still being selected for the committee. It's actually one of your favorite sources. It's Ibn Abi Dawud's Kitab al-Masahif, page 33, and Ibn Kathir said that it has a Sahih Isnad. Ibn Abi Dawud, Kitab al-Masahif, page 33, Ibn Kathir said it has a Sahih Isnad. You're saying that, I think I heard you say, that with the New Testament variants, they don't affect doctrine. I'll tell you to go to Bruce Metzger and Bart Ehrman's both the text of the New Testament, Transmission, Corruption, Restoration, page 285, and show the different issues of doctrine that they have said are affected by textual variants. For example, the Gospels have been used to support adoptionistic Christology, or one of anti-Docetic, or did Luke include the doctrine of atonement, or whether members of the Johannine community embraced the Gnostic Christology. So your textual variants do affect key issues of doctrine, ours don't. And no, I did not say scribal errors are okay, Nabeel. What I was saying is that, of course, scribal errors did exist in our manuscripts, but that doesn't mean that I'm saying it became a part of a transmission and recitation of the Qur'an. You're saying that, but Ibn Mas'ud is Muhammad's greatest teacher. He said there were no 113 and 114. Yeah, but who's the bigger authority than Ibn Mas'ud? Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Come on. You said, Ibn Mas'ud said, maintain your Qur'ans and don't go with Uthman. I don't know if you paid attention in my rebuttals, but I said this was part of a mistranslation. Ibn Mas'ud, according to the Arabic, was actually saying, I was exempted from being selected from the committee, and someone else was being selected. Yes, I know, it's a gross mistranslation, but I can explain it to you if you want later on, if you know Arabic. You're saying Zayd possibly searched for what he forgot. I'll grant you that. It's possible, but I don't know if you could prove that, because the narration said, when we wrote the Holy Quran, I missed one of the verses of Surah Al-Ahzab, which I used to hear Allah's apostle recite. To me, it kind of sounds like he's saying that he knows what the verse but again, my interpretation could be possible, yours could be possible, but I think mine is stronger since I have two scholars from the first century that agree with me. You don't have anyone. You're saying, okay, fine. All right, I'm just going to close this. I'm going to refute one more argument, sorry. He gave a narration where it said, Ubay said that he's not willing to let go of some of the narrations. First of all, Ubay wanted to personally retain everything for himself, including the abrogated revelations. He did not say that others had to do the same. It was his personal choice. Secondly, nowhere do we see that Ubay imposed upon anyone else to do what he did. For if he believed that the Muslims were not reciting what was meant to be recited, then he surely would have spoken out. Thirdly, just because the text of Ubay contained the verse of stoning, for example, that does not follow that he did not regard it to be abrogated, let alone that he wanted the whole Muslim community to recite it that way. Fourthly, and most importantly, Ubay was part of the committee selected by Uthman, and he agreed with all of the other members of the committee on the final Uthmanic text. So what do we see? We see that the qira'at that we have today, the variants that we have today, are approved by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and that the companions all used to recite them, which is all that matters at the end of the day. And we see that Nabeel took narrations, made a mountain out of a molehill out of them, introduced red herrings, appealed to weak sources, imposing his personal beliefs and ignoring Islamic teachings, appealed to narrations, gave misleading interpretations about them, did double standards, appealed to faulty translations, mishandled the narrations, did not consider historical context, and did, I'm not going to mention the factual error because you said you had your own narration on that. So let me close by saying, praise be to Allah, our magnificent Creator, who has ensured that today we have access to His fully preserved and final revelation to mankind. The next step for us to take right now is to get hold of a copy of the Qur'an and approach it with the intention of seeking the truth and seeking God. If you do so with an open mind and an open heart, I guarantee you that Allah will guide you to this beautiful religion where you will find true peace and attain salvation. Thank you very much.
Okay, Nabeel, you have your 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Bassam, for your position. I really enjoyed this debate. I think when I go back, I will look at everything Bassam had to say and study it, investigate it. Perhaps after we've studied each other's positions some more, we could debate this topic again in the future. This time we'll have more equal ground on what each other is saying, so we can investigate it at home. I do want to clarify some things for everyone here. I think there were plenty of places where we misconstrued what the other person was saying. I'm sure I am guilty of it too. But one point that I want to quote is from Yasser Qadi on page 128 of his book. Al-Bukhari mentions Anas ibn Malik as saying that only 4 people memorized the Qur'an before the Prophet's death. So I'm just quoting exactly as Yasser Qadi says. Now, if he's saying Yasser Qadi said it wrong, I think that's kind of hard to believe when it comes to interpreting the hadith. I don't agree with all his conclusions on the hadith, but when it comes to interpreting the meaning of the hadith, I think he's pretty solid. That's why I meant by he's a good scholar. So I don't think that was sufficiently dealt with. He says that the concept of the preservation of the Qur'an on the tablet in heaven is a different topic. I thought we were talking about the preservation of the Qur'an. I mean, when we're trying to talk about the definition of preservation, I think it's appropriate to see what Islam teaches about that. Now, he takes offense when I do not talk about theological things. He's saying, oh, he doesn't take into account Islamic teaching. He ignores what Islamic teachings, theology says about the Qur'an. Yes, because that's an issue of the actual preservation itself. But you have a double standard here. You're saying in one time, you're ignoring the Islamic teaching, shame on you. Oh, at other points you are accepting the Islamic teaching, shame on you. You can't have both. I think clearly it's important to talk about the Islamic definition of preservation in this kind of debate, but it's not appropriate to take the way Islam interprets these variant texts, because we're approaching that more objectively. You said there's a contradiction about, when I mentioned the various things about alcohol that's found in the Quran, you said, oh, the first one, the second one are not contradictions because they both don't apply. I'm not talking about a contradiction in application. I'm talking about contradiction in the text. Again, I'm not going to theology, I'm going to the text. Clearly the text contradicts each other, though the application may not. My whole point in bringing this up was that abrogation seems to be a concept whereby you can excuse contradictions in the text. This, to any objective observer, would seem to be basically a way out, an escape clause, if you will. He says, we don't see any disagreements from the early people. I'm telling you, we see disagreements in many sources. Let me quote one here. It says, Hudayfa said, the Kufans say, use the text of Abdullah, and the Basran say, the text of Abu Musa, by God. If I reach the command of the faithful, I will recommend that he drown these readings. Abdullah responds by saying, do that, and God will drown you, but not in water. What is this? This is a disagreement. Abdullah basically says, you do that, you're going to hell. They're disagreeing with each other on the variant readings, what to do with them. This is a disagreement of the highest degree, and to the point where one believer can say to another, you're going to go to hell for saying that. So we do have disagreements, we have them all over the place. You said Omar did not want to include the verse on stoning. I showed you already in As-Sayyid that he clearly says that I would include it if I could not be accused of adding to the Word of God. And you're saying, even if scribal errors exist, you're saying, I think you didn't understand me at this point. I said, you said it was okay that scribal errors exist. Not that they're propagated. I mean, what you are trying to say is that if there's a scribal error, it's just contained in that one spot. And therefore, it's not really a problem. That's what you're trying to say. I'm just saying that he's okay with a scribal error being in a specific spot. Again, I don't disagree with him on these things. I'm just trying to show you what we both agree on. In conclusion, I just want to say the following things. When we look at the text of the Qur'an, it seems that he and I agree on a lot of things. We agree that there can be scribal errors. We agree that people had disagreements before Uthman's time about what should be included. We agree that Ibn Mas'ud didn't include certain verses. We agree things on various accounts. The difference we have is the conclusion. I'm not coming at this from an Islamic standpoint. I'm coming at this from an objective standpoint. I'm saying all these variations, pre-Uthmanic, post-Uthmanic, variations in chapters, variations in verses, variations within verses, variations in words, contradictions, will surely not. These kinds of things he can explain theologically. I'm saying any objective observer who comes to this will say these are the same things we find in other books. That was my whole point. I think that has been conceded by both sides, that has been agreed upon. I am not trying to say the Quran is horribly corrupt. I would never try to say that. I think it's a very well-preserved book, but not 100%, not perfect, the way that Muslims would tend to believe. In the end, I would just like to invite everyone to continue to investigate this on their own behalf. Neither of us are scholars. Neither of us have PhDs in this issue. We're going to continue to learn. I invite everyone to please look into these things by your own self so that we can continue to have this scholarly discourse. Thank you very much.
Thank you to Bassam and Nabeel for what I think was a truly excellent discussion this afternoon. Just to remind you, the grand finale debate will be in this room at 5:15 this afternoon. It is entitled The Concept of God in Islam and in Christianity. David Wood will be participating in that along with Abdullah as well. So hopefully see you
David Wood and James White for your help on this topic. So you're going to see this one. Good stuff.
No.